Hash the billionaire's son cried when he saw the maid, and his first words made his father drop to his knees. People said Julian Ashworth had everything a man could want. Wealth, power, a name that opened every door in the city before he even knocked. But none of it mattered the night his own charity gala began to fall apart in front of 300 stunned guests. The chandeliers blazed overhead like frozen fireworks, casting golden light across a ballroom that smelled of orchids and old money. A jazz quartet played softly near the stage, their notes curling through the perfumed air like silk ribbons. And Vanessa Cole, the woman Julian had been seeing for 8 months, stood at his side in a floor-length emerald gown, her honey-blonde hair blown out to perfection, her sharp green eyes scanning the room the way a general surveys a conquered field. She smiled like she already owned the evening, like she already owned him. Then his 3-year-old son, Caleb, shattered the illusion. What started as a small whimper, barely audible beneath the music, turned into a piercing, guttural cry that echoed through the ballroom and stopped every conversation dead. Julian's head snapped toward the sound. Caleb was supposed to be upstairs with the natty. He wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the event. But there he was, standing at the edge of the ballroom in his pajamas, his blue knitted blanket dragging on the marble floor behind him, his small body trembling with a sound Julian hadn't heard in over a year. Because Caleb didn't cry anymore. He didn't speak. He didn't laugh. He didn't make any sound at all. Not since the night 14 months ago when Julian had sat him down on the living room floor and tried to explain, in words no 3-year-old should ever have to hear, that Mummy wasn't coming home, that the water had taken her, that she was gone. Caleb had gone silent that night, completely, absolutely silent, as if the part of him that made sound had drowned too. Julian rushed toward him, his 6'2" frame cutting through the crowd, his charcoal Brioni suit brushing against guests who stepped aside without being asked. His heart hammered. His large hands, the ones that signed billion-dollar contracts without trembling, shook as he reached for his son. "Caleb, buddy, hey, I'm here, Daddy's here." But Caleb wasn't looking at him. The child's tear-filled eyes, big, round, brown, and ancient with a grief no toddler should carry, were fixed on someone else. Someone standing quietly near the service corridor at the far end of the ballroom, dressed in a plain black uniform, pushing a cleaning cart. A woman so still and so small against the grandeur of the room that she might as well have been part of the wallpaper. Hope Enderu, a maid hired through an agency for the evening. A woman no one in that room had noticed, spoken to, or even glanced at since the night began. Before Julian could react, Caleb wriggled out of his arms with a strength that startled him, dropped his blue blanket on the marble floor, and ran. Not walked, ran. His bare feet slapping against the cold stone, his pajama pants too long, nearly tripping him twice. He ran past the governor's wife, past the head of Julian's board of directors, past a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes who barely sidestepped in time. He ran with the desperate, uncoordinated urgency of a child chasing the only thing in the world that mattered, and he threw himself at Hope's legs with a force that made her stumble backward into the cleaning cart. Her dark brown eyes went wide. Her hands, rough, calloused, nails cut short with no polish, flew up instinctively, hovering above the child's back without touching him, as if she wasn't sure whether she was allowed. Then came the words nobody expected, the words that froze the entire room. "Don't let them hurt you again." Not one word, a full sentence. Spoken in a voice so raspy and broken it sounded like a door opening after years rusted shut. A voice that 300 people in that ballroom had never heard, because Caleb Ashworth had not spoken a single syllable in 14 months. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave. Vanessa's perfectly composed smile vanished. Julian stopped mid-stride, his Italian leather shoes rooted to the marble. His breath punched out of him as if someone had driven a fist into his sternum. His son was speaking. His silent, broken, grieving son was speaking. And his first words in over a year weren't mama or Dada or hungry or scared. They were a warning. A protection, aimed at a stranger in a maid's uniform that nobody in this room had given a second thought. Hope stood frozen, her slim frame, 5'5", wiry, not fragile but lean in the way of someone who had survived on little for a long time, trembled visibly. Her dark brown skin stretched taut over high cheekbones, and the dark circles beneath her eyes, the ones she'd tried to hide with cheap concealer, showed through under the ballroom's unforgiving light. Her natural hair was cropped close to her scalp, practical, easy to maintain. A small scar sat above her left eyebrow, thin, white, deliberate in its shape. The kind of scar that didn't come from an accident. I don't know why he came to me, sir," she whispered, her voice barely above breath. "I swear I've never seen this child before in my life," but Caleb held her tighter. He buried his face into the fabric of her black uniform, his small fingers gripping the material with a ferocity that turned his knuckles pale. He pressed himself against her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had been liquid and shifting since the night his mother disappeared beneath dark water. And he kept repeating it, softer each time, like a lullaby he was singing to her instead of the other way around. "Don't let them hurt you. Don't let them hurt you again." Julian's chest tightened until he thought his ribs might crack. His son, this small, silent boy who flinched when strangers spoke too loudly, who slept on the floor beside Julian's bed because he was terrified of being alone, who hadn't clung to another human being since Elena died, was clinging to this woman as if she were oxygen, not seeking comfort, giving it, as if whatever pain she carried was something Caleb could feel radiating off her skin, and he had decided with the pure, irrational certainty of a child that she needed him. Vanessa stormed forward. Her Louboutin heels clicked against the marble like warning shots. She was tall, 5'9" in those heels, and she moved with the practiced confidence of a woman who had never been ignored in her life. Her honey blonde hair caught the chandelier light. Her sharp green eyes, beautiful but calculating, locked onto Hope with the precision of a hawk spotting movement in a field. "This is ridiculous," she hissed, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearest guests to hear. She put him up to this. Look at her, she planned this. She's been wandering around the event unsupervised, and now she's using a child to make a scene. It's a con. Hope flinched. The accusation didn't just hit her. It landed like something old and familiar, something that had been thrown at her before in a different voice, a different room, a different life. Her shoulders hunched inward. That small, involuntary collapse people learn when the world has taught them to expect blame before kindness. She lowered her gaze to the floor as if shrinking could make her invisible again. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "I was assigned to clean the service hallway. I wasn't even supposed to be in this room. I was just passing through." But Vanessa wasn't interested in truth. Vanessa was interested in control. And right now, a woman in a maid's uniform was holding the attention of every person in the room, including the man Vanessa intended to marry, whether he knew it yet or not. "You think this is a coincidence?" Vanessa snapped, her red-nailed hand cutting through the air. "A child who hasn't spoken in over a year suddenly says full sentences to a random maid?" She coached him. "She's been near this family before. Check her phone. Check her bag. I guarantee you'll find." "Enough," Julian said it quietly. But the authority in his voice, low, calm, absolute, the voice of a man who ran a $12 billion hotel empire and had never once needed to raise his volume to be obeyed, silenced the entire room. Conversations that had resumed in nervous whispers died instantly. Even the jazz quartet faltered, the trumpet player lowering his instrument mid-note. Julian stepped between Vanessa and Hope, not aggressively, not dramatically. He simply placed his broad-shouldered 6'2" frame in the space between them, blocking the venom aimed at the trembling woman behind him. "You're accusing her without a single piece of evidence," he said, his dark brown eyes, intense, guarded. The eyes of a man who had learned to read rooms the way soldiers read terrain, fixed on Vanessa with a stillness that made her step back half an inch. "Caleb's reaction is strange. I don't understand it. But that doesn't give you the right to tear this woman apart in front of 300 people. Vanessa's jaw tightened. Her green eyes flickered, not with hurt, but with the cold recalculation of a woman whose strategy had just been blocked. "You're defending her," she said. "I'm stopping you from attacking someone who hasn't done anything wrong." For a moment they stood there, the billionaire and the woman who wanted to be his wife, and something shifted between them that the guests could feel but not name. A hairline fracture and a foundation that had never been as solid as Vanessa pretended. That was when Hope finally looked up, slowly, cautiously. The way a person looks up when they've spent so long staring at the ground that lifting their head feels like an act of defiance. Her deep brown eyes, watchful, always scanning, the eyes of a woman who had memorized every exit in this building within 5 minutes of arriving, met Julian's for the first time, and what he saw in them wasn't gratitude. It was disbelief. Pure, raw, disoriented disbelief, as if someone choosing to stand in front of her instead of against her was so foreign, so impossible that she didn't have a framework for processing it. as if kindness was a language she had once spoken fluently but had forgotten entirely. Caleb tugged her uniform again, pressing his wet cheek against her hip. "Don't let them," he murmured, his broken little voice muffled by the fabric. "She's scared, Daddy. Help her." Julian felt the words hit him somewhere behind his sternum, in the place where grief lived, where Elena's absence was a permanent, low-frequency hum he'd learned to function around but never escape. His son hadn't spoken to him, hadn't spoken to anyone, in 14 months, and now his first real words were about someone else's pain, as if Caleb's silence hadn't been emptiness at all. It had been listening, waiting, sensing. And whatever he sensed in this woman had broken through every wall his small, shattered heart had built. Julian knelt, his $1,000 suit pressed into a puddle of spilled champagne on the marble floor, and he didn't notice and wouldn't have cared if he had. He brought himself to Caleb's level, to Hope's level, and he looked at his son with the steady, searching gaze of a father trying to understand something his intellect couldn't reach. "Caleb," he said softly. "Why her, buddy? Why now?" The little boy looked up. His light brown skin, a blend of Julian's deep brown and Elena's olive, was streaked with tears. His curly dark hair, the hair Julian still couldn't figure out how to properly comb, was mussed and tangled. His big brown eyes, serious and ancient in a way that no 3-year-old's eyes should ever be, held his father's gaze with a steadiness that made Julian's breath catch. And then Caleb said the sentence that would change everything. "She's scared, Daddy, like Mummy was, before the water." The room didn't gasp this time. It went somewhere beyond gasping, into a silence so complete that Julian could hear the ice settling in a glass 40 feet away. He felt the words enter him like a blade, not cutting but parting, opening something he had kept sealed since the night Elena died. Because the official story was that Elena drowned. An accident, a rip current at the resort in Maine where they'd been vacationing. Her body was never recovered. The case was closed. But Julian had never fully believed it. There had been something in Elena's eyes in the weeks before that trip, a watchfulness, a fear she wouldn't name. She had started locking doors she'd never locked before, checking her phone with a tension in her jaw that didn't match the messages she claimed were from her sister. And when Julian had asked, gently at first, then with growing concern, she had smiled and said, "I'm fine. I'm just tired." She wasn't fine. She was scared. And now his 3-year-old son, who had been in the next room the night before they left for Maine, who had been too young to understand the muffled argument Julian barely remembered, was standing in a ballroom 14 months later, telling him that this stranger, this maid, carried the same fear. Julian looked at Hope, really looked at her for the first time. Not at her uniform, not at her position, at her. He saw the way her eyes were fixed on the nearest exit, not casually, but with the practiced precision of someone who had calculated the distance, the obstacles, the seconds it would take to reach it. He saw the way her shoulders curved inward, making herself physically smaller, as if she had learned that taking up less space meant attracting less danger. He saw her hands, trembling not with guilt, but with the bone-deep, adrenal fear of a woman whose body was screaming at her to run, even as her feet stayed rooted to the floor because a child was holding on to her and she couldn't bring herself to shake him off. This wasn't a woman scheming. This wasn't a con. This was a woman who had spent years trying to be invisible, and a 3-year-old boy had just made her the most visible person in a room full of the most powerful people in the city. Julian stood slowly. He didn't touch Hope. He didn't reach for Caleb. He simply stood beside them. Not between Hope and Vanessa this time, but with Hope, and turned to the room. "The evening is over," he said. His voice carried the same calm authority, but beneath it was something new. Something that hadn't been there an hour ago. A decision forming in real time, hardening with every second. "Thank you all for coming. Marcus will see you out." Marcus Chin, Julian's head of security, 52, compact, ex-military with a graying buzz cut and the kind of still, watchful eyes that missed nothing, materialized at the edge of the crowd as if he'd been waiting for exactly this signal. He began directing guests toward the exits with quiet efficiency, his presence alone enough to move people who were used to being unmovable. Vanessa didn't move. She stood with her arms crossed, her emerald gown catching the light, her red nails pressing into her own biceps. "Julian," she said, and her voice had dropped into something low and dangerous. "You're sending 300 guests home because of a maid?" Julian looked at her. And for the first time in 8 months, he saw her clearly, not the beauty, not the charm, not the social ease that had made her so convenient to be seen with. He saw the calculation. The way she had used the word maid like a weapon, loading it with everything she wanted the room to hear. That this woman was beneath them, beneath concern, beneath protection. "I'm sending them home," Julian said evenly, "because my son just spoke for the first time in 14 months, and I intend to find out why. If that inconveniences you, the door is right there." Vanessa's green eyes flashed, but she was smart enough to know when a battle was lost, even if the war was ongoing. She gathered her clutch, adjusted her gown, and walked toward the exit with the kind of controlled, unhurried stride that said, "This isn't over." It wasn't. Julian turned back to Hope. She hadn't moved. Caleb was still pressed against her, his breathing finally slowing, his small body softening from rigid fear into something that looked, impossibly, like peace. His eyes were half closed. His fingers still gripped her uniform, but loosely now, the grip of a child who had found something he'd been looking for and was afraid it might disappear if he let go. Hope stood perfectly still. Her hand still hovered above Caleb's back, trembling, not touching him, as if she believed she didn't have the right. "You can hold him," Julian said quietly. Hope's eyes lifted to his. They were wet. "It's okay," he said. "You can hold him." Slowly, carefully, as if she were handling something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile, Hope lowered her rough, scarred hands onto Caleb's small back. The boy exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry 14 months of silence with it, and melted into her. Julian watched them. This woman he didn't know, this child he loved more than breathing. And he felt something he hadn't felt since Elena was alive. A certainty that bypassed logic, bypassed evidence, bypassed every rational faculty his business mind had spent decades sharpening. This woman wasn't a threat. This woman was carrying something enormous, something dark, something that had nearly crushed her. And whatever it was, his son could feel it. His son had felt it across a crowded room, through 300 bodies and a wall of music and champagne and chatter, and had run to her the way you run toward a fire. Not because you want to burn, but because someone inside is trapped, and you can't stand the sound of them screaming even if no one else can hear it. "Hope," Julian said gently. "Come with me. We'll talk somewhere private." Hope's eyes darted to the exit one more time. Her body tensed. For a half second, Julian was certain she was going to bolt, was going to peel his son off her legs and run and disappear into the night and become invisible again, the way she clearly had been for years. But Caleb tightened his grip and said softly into the fabric of her uniform, "Stay." Hope closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her cheek, catching the last of the chandelier light before it disappeared into the collar of her plain black shirt. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Julian nodded to Marcus, who fell into step behind them, close enough to protect, far enough to give space. And together, the three of them, the billionaire, the maid, and the boy who had chosen her, walked out of the ballroom and into the quiet corridor beyond, leaving behind 300 unanswered questions and a room that would never forget what it had just witnessed. The hallway was dim. The amber wall sconces cast long, soft shadows that stretched across the marble like the fading echoes of the chaos they'd just left behind. The noise of the departing guests, murmurs, footsteps, car doors, filtered through the walls like a distant tide. But in this corridor, the only sounds were Caleb's slow breathing and the quiet, unsteady rhythm of Hope's footsteps behind Julian. She was following him, but barely. Every few steps she slowed, as if her body was fighting a war between the part of her that wanted to trust this man and the part that had learned, through years of hard and terrible lessons, that trusting powerful men was how you got destroyed. Julian noticed. He didn't turn around. He didn't rush her. He simply kept walking at a pace that said, "I'm not chasing you and I'm not leaving you behind." They reached a small sitting room at the end of the corridor, a private study Julian used when he needed to disappear from his own events. Leather chairs, a cold fireplace, bookshelves filled with first editions he'd never read, and Elena's old art books he couldn't bear to move. He held the door open and stepped aside. Hope paused at the threshold. Her eyes swept the room the way they'd swept the ballroom. Exits, windows, obstacles. She was doing it unconsciously, Julian realized. It wasn't suspicion. It was survival. The kind of constant, low-grade threat assessment that becomes automatic when danger has been your default state for long enough. "You're safe here," Julian said. He didn't touch her, didn't reach out, but he put every ounce of steadiness he had into those 3 words, and something in Hope's rigid posture shifted, not relaxed, not yet, but acknowledged, as if she'd heard a sound she recognized from very long ago and couldn't quite place. She stepped inside. Caleb was still in her arms, his face pressed into her shoulder, his curly hair tickling her jaw. She sat in the leather chair closest to the door. Julian noted that too, and adjusted the boy on her lap with a tenderness so instinctive it made Julian's throat tighten. She didn't hold Caleb the way strangers hold children, stiffly, at a distance, unsure. She held him the way mothers hold children, the way Elena used to. Julian sat across from her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He studied the woman his son had chosen over every other person in a room full of 300. Her dark brown skin was smooth except for the scar above her left eyebrow, thin, precise, the kind that came from something sharp and deliberate. Her eyes were the color of black coffee, deep and watchful, and they carried a weariness that went far beyond physical exhaustion. This was the weariness of a woman who had been running for so long that she'd forgotten what stillness felt like. Her cropped natural hair, her bare earlobes, her unadorned fingers. Everything about her had been stripped to essentials. No jewelry, no vanity, nothing that could identify her, slow her down, or tie her to a place. She wore no perfume. She carried no phone that he could see. The only thing on her person that seemed to matter was the child in her arms, and she held him as though he were the first safe thing she'd touched in years. "Hope," Julian said quietly. "I need to understand what just happened out there." She flinched at the sound of her own name. A small, sharp contraction of her shoulders, as if being called by name was itself a kind of exposure. "I don't have answers for you, sir," she said. Her voice was thin, barely above a whisper, the voice of someone who had spent years being told to be quiet and had internalized it so deeply that volume itself felt dangerous. "I was hired through a staffing agency for tonight. I was assigned to the service corridor. I wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the ballroom. I was just passing through when he—" She looked down at Caleb, her lips pressed together. "When he found me," Julian studied her, the way her breath caught on the word found. Not ran to me or grabbed me. Found, as if the boy had been searching. "My son hasn't spoken in 14 months, Julian said. He kept his voice gentle but direct, the way he ran meetings, clear, no games, no traps. He hasn't smiled. He hasn't cried. He has barely eaten. Every specialist in the country has told me he's locked inside himself, that the trauma of losing his mother sealed something shut, and tonight he walked into a room he shouldn't have been in, crossed a ballroom full of people he knows, and ran to you, a woman he has never met, and spoke full sentences for the first time in over a year." He paused, let the weight of it settle. "So I'm not asking you to explain his behavior. I'm asking you to help me understand what he saw." Hope's fingers tightened on Caleb's small back. The boy stirred but didn't wake. His breathing was slow and deep now, the breathing of a child who felt for the first time in over a year, safe enough to sleep. "I don't know what he saw," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word, and Julian heard it, the fracture line running through her composure. She was telling the truth about not understanding Caleb's reaction, but she was lying about something else, not maliciously, instinctively. The way animals hide wounds from predators. Julian didn't push. Not yet. "Caleb said you were scared," he said carefully. "He said you were scared like his mummy was, before the water." Hope went still, completely, absolutely still. The kind of stillness that isn't calm but frozen, the body's last resort when fight and flight have both been exhausted. "I don't know anything about your wife, sir," she whispered. "I know you don't," Julian said. "But my son does, and whatever he felt in you tonight was real enough to break through 14 months of silence." He leaned forward, not closer, just more present. "Hope, are you in some kind of trouble?" Her breath hitched. Her eyes darted to the door, fast, automatic, the calculation happening before conscious thought could intervene. Distance to exit, obstacles, seconds. "I'm not dangerous," she whispered. "I promise you that. I would never hurt your son. I would never—" "I didn't ask if you were dangerous," Julian said. "I asked if you were safe." The question landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Julian watched the ripples move across Hope's face. Shock first, then confusion, then something that looked like it might be pain, and finally, rising from beneath all of it like a thing that had been buried alive and was clawing toward air, the raw and trembling edge of truth. Her eyes filled, her lips pressed together so hard they went pale. Her hands shook against Caleb's sleeping back. "No," she breathed, "I'm not safe." The words hung in the dim room, trembling, fragile, real. And Julian Ashworth, a man who had built a $12 billion empire on calculation and control, felt the ground shift beneath him. because whatever hope Enderu was running from had just walked into his life through the arms of his son, and he knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the look in a 3-year-old's eyes, that he could not let this woman face it alone. Not tonight. Not while Caleb slept in her arms like she was the only safe harbor left in the world. Not while the echo of his son's broken, beautiful voice still hung in the air between them. Don't let them hurt you again. Julian drew a breath, steadied himself, and made a decision that would change the course of his life, his son's life, and the life of the woman sitting across from him. The woman who had walked into his home invisible and was about to become the most important person in it. Then you're staying, he said quietly, tonight. Ira, where I can make sure no one touches you. Hope stared at him, not with gratitude. That would come later, if it came at all. With disbelief. The pure, stunned, disoriented disbelief of a woman who had stopped believing that protection was something the world offered to people like her. Why? She whispered. Julian looked at his son. Sleeping, peaceful, holding on to this woman like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking in silence for 14 months. Because my son spoke for the first time in over a year, Julian said, and he used his words to protect you. That means something. I don't know what yet, but I'm going to find out. Hope's lower lip trembled. A tear escaped. Just one, sliding down her cheek, catching the amber light before disappearing into the collar of her black uniform. And outside, beyond the walls of this quiet room, beyond the gates of the Ashworth estate, a man in a dark suit stood on the sidewalk across the street, tall, 6'1", solid build, imposing without being muscular. Dark skin, clean-shaven, handsome in the way that made people trust him instantly. He wore a clerical collar beneath his overcoat. His hands were clasped in front of him, open-palmed, peaceful, practiced. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at the security camera he knew was watching him. Pastor Gabriel Okoro had found her, and he was in no hurry at all. Julian sat with the silence the way he sat with difficult negotiations, patiently, without flinching, letting it do the work that words couldn't. Hope's confession, "No, I'm not safe," still hung between them like smoke, shapeless but impossible to ignore. He could feel the weight of it pressing against the walls of this small, dim room, filling the space between the leather chairs, settling into the grain of the bookshelves that still held Elena's art books. He didn't rush her. He didn't press. He had learned in boardrooms and hospital waiting rooms and the 14 months of hollow silence that followed his wife's death that the truth comes when it's ready, and the surest way to kill it is to grab for it too soon. Caleb slept in Hope's lap. His breathing had settled into the slow, rhythmic pattern of deep sleep, the kind Julian hadn't seen from the boy in over a year. At home, Caleb slept fitfully. He thrashed. He whimpered. He woke at 2, at 3, at 4 in the morning and padded to Julian's bedroom door and stood there, not knocking, not crying, just standing, until Julian sensed him and lifted the covers and the boy crawled in and pressed his small body against his father's back as if trying to disappear into him. But here, in the arms of a woman he'd known for less than 20 minutes, Caleb slept like a child who had finally, impossibly, been given permission to rest. Hope noticed Julian watching them. She stiffened slightly, as if being observed was itself a form of danger. "He'll wake up if I move," she said quietly. It was an apology. An explanation for why she was still sitting there, still holding his son, still existing in his space. As if she needed to justify her presence even now. "Then don't move," Julian said simply. She blinked, surprised, as though she'd expected him to take the boy back, to dismiss her, to return to the version of the evening that didn't include a trembling woman in a maid's uniform sitting in his private study holding his child. Julian leaned back in his chair but didn't relax. His body carried a tension he couldn't release. The residual charge of Caleb's words still crackling through his nervous system. "She's scared, Daddy, like Mummy was, before the water." He studied Hope's face, the sharp cheekbones, the cropped hair, the scar above her left eyebrow that she hadn't tried to hide because she'd clearly stopped caring about appearances a long time ago, or had learned that vanity was a luxury reserved for people who weren't running. Her dark eyes were lowered, focused on Caleb's sleeping face, and in the amber half-light of the study, Julian could see what the ballroom's glare had hidden. The exhaustion wasn't just physical, it was geological, layers of it, years of it. The kind of tired that sleep can't touch because it lives in the bones, in the blood, in the constant low hum of hypervigilance that never fully powers down. "Hope," he said, not a demand, an invitation. Earlier, when Vanessa accused you of stealing, you weren't just offended. You were terrified. Why? Hope's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on Caleb's back. The boy didn't stir. Because I've lived through it before, she said. Her voice came out flat, controlled, as if she were reciting facts from a report rather than reliving a memory. But Julian had negotiated with enough people to recognize the difference between calm and containment. This woman wasn't calm. She was holding herself together with a force of will that could shatter at any moment. Being blamed, she continued. Being cornered. Having things planted on me so I'd take the fall. Having people look at me the way your guests looked at me tonight. Like I was already guilty before anyone asked a single question. Her jaw tightened. When your girlfriend pointed at me, I felt like I was back there again. Standing in a room full of people who'd already decided what I was. Julian's hands curled into fists on his knees. Not at her. For her. Who did that to you? He asked. Hope swallowed. Her gaze dropped further, past Caleb, past the floor, into some middle distance where the memories lived. My husband, she whispered. Then she corrected herself quickly, sharply, as if the word itself was contaminated. My ex-husband, a man the world called good, a man everyone trusted, her voice thinned to almost nothing. A man with a congregation of 4,000 people who would swear on their lives that he was the most righteous person they'd ever known. The word congregation landed in Julian's chest with a weight he hadn't expected. He said nothing. He let her continue. We were married for 8 years, Hope said. The words came slowly now. Each one dragged from somewhere deep and reluctant, like pulling splinters from beneath skin. The first year was beautiful. He was everything I thought I wanted, kind, attentive, respected. He held my hand in public. He prayed with me every night. He told me God had chosen me for him. She paused. Her throat worked. The second year, he hit me for the first time. I was pregnant. I'd asked him about a charge on our credit card, a hotel room I didn't recognize. He backhanded me so fast I didn't even see his hand move. And then, while I was on the floor holding my stomach, he knelt beside me and prayed. He asked God to forgive me for provoking him. Julian's jaw locked. Something hot and dark moved through him. Not just anger, but a kind of visceral recognition. He had spent his career reading people, and what Hope was describing wasn't just abuse. It was architecture. A system built to trap. I lost the baby, Hope said. Her voice didn't crack this time. It had gone somewhere beyond cracking, into a flatness that was more devastating than tears. He told the congregation it was God's will. He told them I was fragile, emotional, that they should pray for me. And they did. 4,000 people praying for the woman whose husband had killed her child with the back of his hand. Caleb shifted in her lap. A small unconscious movement, and Hope's hand went to his curls automatically, stroking them with a gentleness that seemed to come from a place so deep inside her that even she couldn't control it. Julian watched and felt his heart do something it hadn't done in 14 months, break open a little wider. For the next 7 years, Hope continued. He controlled everything, my phone, my money, my friendships, what I wore, where I went, who I spoke to. He checked the mileage on my car. He timed my grocery trips. If I was 7 minutes late coming home from the store, he'd be standing in the doorway with his Bible in one hand and his belt in the other. She looked up, met Julian's eyes, and what he saw there wasn't self-pity. It was something far more complicated. A mixture of shame and defiance, as if she hated herself for having endured it, and was simultaneously daring him to judge her for it. I tried to leave 3 times, she said. The first time he found me at a motel in Delaware. He brought 2 elders from the church. They prayed over me in the parking lot while he loaded my bags back into the car. The second time I went to the police. I showed them photographs, bruise, a cracked rib, medical records. The officer looked at the photos, looked at me and said, "Ma'am, your husband is Pastor Okoro. I've seen him on television. Are you sure you're not overreacting?" Julian felt the name land like a dropped blade. Pastor Okoro. He didn't recognize it specifically, but he recognized the type, the untouchable men, the ones wrapped in enough public goodness that their private darkness became invisible, the ones whose victims were disbelieved, not because the evidence was weak, but because the alternative was too uncomfortable for people to accept. The third time, Hope said, and her voice finally trembled, I went to a women's shelter. I thought I was safe. I was there for 11 days. On the 12th day he showed up, not angry, calm, smiling. He brought flowers. He brought a letter from his lawyer. He brought a psychiatric evaluation, one I'd never taken, signed by a doctor I'd never met, stating that I suffered from delusional episodes and was a danger to myself. She paused, drew a breath that shook. He had me committed to a psychiatric facility, involuntarily, for 6 months. The room went very quiet. Not the quiet of emptiness, but the quiet of compression. The kind that happens when too much truth is forced into too small a space. Julian felt it pressing against his temples, against his ribs, against the part of his brain that wanted to stand up and put his fist through the bookshelf behind him. 6 months, he repeated, not a question, a reckoning. 6 months, Hope confirmed. In a facility funded in part by donations from his church, with a staff that called him pastor, with doctors who deferred to him because he paid their salaries. Her hands trembled. I wasn't delusional. I wasn't a danger to anyone. I was a woman trying to leave a man who had learned that the most effective prison doesn't have bars. It has a pulpit. Julian exhaled slowly, forcibly through his nose. He wanted to speak. He wanted to say the right thing. But there was no right thing to say to a woman who had been locked in a psychiatric ward by the man who beat her, and he knew that any attempt at comfort would sound hollow compared to what she had survived. So he did the only thing he could. He listened. I escaped, Hope said, not released. Escaped. A night nurse, a woman named Denise, left a side door unlocked on a Tuesday night. She didn't say anything to me. She didn't look at me. She just left the door unlocked and walked away. Hope's voice softened. I never got to thank her. I don't even know her last name. She looked down at Caleb again. The boy slept on, his small chest rising and falling, his fingers loosely curled around the fabric of her uniform. That was 4 years ago, Hope said. I've been running since. Different cities, different names. I cut my hair because he used to grab it. I stopped wearing jewelry because he gave me everything I owned, and I didn't want a single piece of him touching my skin. I clean hotel rooms and office buildings and private homes because those are the jobs where nobody asks for a background check that would flag the psychiatric commitment he manufactured. I avoid commodities. I avoid social media. I avoid any situation where my face might be captured and stored. She met Julian's eyes. I've been invisible for 4 years, Mr. Ashworth. Deliberately, carefully, desperately invisible. And tonight, in the space of 30 seconds, your son made me the most visible person in this city. Julian felt the sentence settle into him like a stone into water. She was right. Whatever anonymity she had built over 4 years of running, Caleb had demolished it in one act of instinctive, inexplicable compassion. 300 guests had seen her face. Vanessa had seen her face. And if Vanessa had seen it, other people would see it soon. Because Vanessa Cole was not a woman who let go of leverage. Hope, Julian said carefully. Your ex-husband, does he know where you are? She shook her head. I don't think so. I haven't used my real name in years. I take cash jobs. I move every few months. The agency that hired me tonight doesn't even have my real social security number. She hesitated. But he looks. He never stops looking. He has resources. Church money, connections, people who owe him favors. He's put out missing person reports on me. He's told people I'm mentally ill and off my medication. He's framed the search as concern, as love. Her voice hardened on the last word, turning it into something sharp and bitter. The world doesn't see a predator looking for his victim. It sees a devoted husband searching for his sick wife, and that's exactly what he designed. Julian sat with that for a long moment. His mind, the mind that had built an empire by seeing 3 moves ahead, was already mapping possibilities, risks, countermeasures. But beneath the calculation, something else was moving, something more primal. The same protective fury he'd felt in the ballroom when Vanessa had called Hope a con artist. The same instinct that had made him step between them without thinking. Because Julian Ashworth knew what it looked like when someone was hunted. He'd seen it once before. In Elena's eyes in the weeks before the trip to Maine. That watchfulness, that flinch at unexpected sounds. That way of checking locks and scanning rooms and sleeping with her body angled toward the door. He'd missed it then. He'd told himself she was stressed, tired, overthinking. He'd missed the signs because missing them was easier than confronting what they meant. And 14 months later, Elena was dead, and Caleb was silent, and Julian lived every day with the knowledge that he had failed the one person who needed him to see. He would not miss it again. You said you have a daughter, Julian said. Hope went rigid. The change was instantaneous, from exhausted and vulnerable to locked down, every muscle tense, every nerve firing. Her eyes sharpened, her arms tightened around Caleb. And Julian realized with a cold certainty that he had just touched the thing she guarded more fiercely than her own survival. How do you know about my daughter? She whispered. The fear in her voice was different now, higher, sharper, the fear of a mother, not a victim. You mentioned her earlier, Julian said gently. That wasn't true. She hadn't. But the staffing agency paperwork Marcus had pulled when they first vetted the evening's temporary staff listed a next-of-kin contact, Grace Enderu, minor, age 9. Julian had glanced at it earlier without registering it. Now it blazed in his memory like a signal flare. Hope's face told him everything. She hadn't mentioned Grace. She knew she hadn't. And the fact that Julian knew about the girl meant someone had accessed records she'd thought were buried. Her name is Grace, Hope said finally. The words came out like they were being torn from her. She's 9. She lives with him, with Gabriel. He got full custody when I was committed. The psychiatric hold was the grounds. The court ruled I was an unfit mother based on a diagnosis that doesn't exist, signed by a doctor on his payroll. Her voice broke for the first time. I haven't seen my daughter in 4 years, Mr. Ashworth. 4 years. She thinks I abandoned her. She thinks I left because I didn't love her enough. That's what he tells her. That's the story he's built. The devoted father raising his daughter alone after his troubled wife disappeared. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them. Her hands were occupied, one holding Caleb, the other gripping the arm of the chair as if it were the only thing keeping her from falling through the floor. Grace draws pictures of me, Hope whispered. I know because Denise, the nurse who helped me escape, she still works at the facility. She has a friend who goes to Gabriel's church. She sends me updates when she can through channels he can't trace. Grace draws pictures of a woman with short hair holding her hand. Every night, for 4 years. Julian's vision blurred. He blinked it clear, set his jaw, and made a promise to himself that he would keep if it cost him everything he'd built. A knock at the door broke the silence. Marcus stepped inside. Compact, controlled, his gray buzz cut catching the low light. His face, usually as readable as concrete, carried an expression Julian had only seen twice before in 20 years. Once when Elena's body wasn't found, and once when Caleb stopped speaking. Julian, Marcus said quietly, you need to see something. He placed a tablet on the desk and tapped the screen. Security footage from the estate's front gate, time-stamped 12 minutes ago. The image was high definition, clear as glass in the streetlight's glow. A man stood on the sidewalk across from the main entrance, tall, 6'1". Solid build, imposing without being muscular. Dark skin, clean-shaven, handsome in a way that made you instinctively want to trust him. He wore a dark overcoat with a clerical collar visible beneath it. His hands were clasped in front of him, open-palmed, a gesture of practiced peace. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled directly at the camera with the calm, patient confidence of a man who had all the time in the world. Hope made a sound, not a scream, not a gasp. Something smaller and worse, a whimper that came from the bottom of her throat, from the place where language fails and the body takes over. Her face went gray. Her eyes went wide and blank at the same time, the look of a person whose worst nightmare has just materialized in high definition on a screen 3 feet away. No, she breathed. No, that's not. He can't be here. He can't. But she knew, even before Julian asked. She knew. Hope, Julian said, his voice steady even as his blood turned to ice. Is that him? Her lips moved, but no sound came. Caleb stirred in her arms, sensing the shift in her body. The sudden rigidity, the hammering of her heart against his small sleeping frame. She clutched the boy tighter, rocking instinctively, an automatic maternal rhythm that her body produced even as her mind was shattering. Gabriel, she finally choked out. That's Gabriel. He found me. The name filled the room like a gas leak, invisible, suffocating, and carrying the promise of explosion. Julian stared at the screen, at the man smiling in the streetlight, at the clerical collar, at the clasped hands and the crinkled eyes and the carefully constructed image of benevolence that masked something Julian could now see clearly, could feel in his gut with a certainty that bypassed every rational circuit in his brain. This man was dangerous, not the loud, obvious kind of dangerous, the quiet kind, the kind that built systems, the kind that turned institutions into weapons, the kind that smiled at security cameras because he wanted you to know he was there, and he wanted you to know he wasn't afraid. How did he find this place? Julian asked, his voice low. Marcus swallowed. It was the only time Julian had ever seen the man hesitate. Vanessa, Marcus said. The word detonated in the room. Hope's eyes went wide with a horror that seemed to open up beneath her like a trap door. Vanessa, the woman who had spent the evening publicly attacking her, accusing her of manipulation, demanding she be searched and expelled. That woman hadn't just been hostile, she'd been strategic. She had recognized Hope somehow or researched her after the scene in the ballroom and had contacted the one person on Earth Hope was running from. How? Julian demanded. Marcus pulled up a second screen. Call logs from Vanessa's phone, accessed through the estate's Wi-Fi network, which Julian's security team monitored as standard protocol for events. Vanessa had made a call 17 minutes ago to a number registered to the administrative office of New Life Covenant Church. The call lasted 4 minutes and 22 seconds. 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Enough to say a name, an address, and a description. Enough to undo 4 years of running. Hope pressed her forehead to Caleb's hair. Her whole body shook. She was whispering something, not to Julian, not to Marcus, not to anyone in the room. A prayer, maybe. Ora plia. The words were too quiet and too broken to make out. But the sound of them, the raw, animal desperation of a woman who had been cornered for the last time, cut through Julian with a precision that no boardroom confrontation had ever achieved. He can't take me, she whispered. He can't find grace through me, please. Please don't let him. Julian moved, not dramatically, not theatrically. He crossed the room in 3 strides, knelt in front of the chair where Hope sat holding his sleeping son, and placed his hand over hers. Steady, warm, unshakable. Look at me, he said. She did. Her eyes were wet, wild, fractured with the kind of fear that lives in the marrow. He will not touch you, Julian said. His voice was low and fierce and carried the weight of every resource, every connection, every dollar, and every ounce of protective fury he possessed. Not tonight, not tomorrow, not while you are under my roof and my name is on the deed. Hope stared at him, and for the first time since Caleb had run to her in the ballroom, for the first time perhaps in 4 years, something in her eyes shifted. The fear didn't disappear. It couldn't. But beneath it, pushing up through the cracks like the first green shoot through concrete, was something she had stopped believing existed. Hope, her own name, the one she'd been given at birth and had spent 4 years trying to outrun. And now, in a dim room at a billionaire's house, with a sleeping child in her arms and a predator standing outside the gates, she felt it stir inside her for the first time in longer than she could remember. Marcus, Julian said, without looking away from her. Double the perimeter security. No one enters or exits without my authorization. And get me Daniel Whitfield on the phone. Daniel Whitfield was the most expensive criminal defense attorney on the Eastern Seaboard. He was also Julian's college roommate. He owed Julian 7 favors and had explicitly told Julian to call him at any hour, for any reason, no questions asked. On it, Marcus said, and disappeared through the door with the efficient silence of a man who had spent 30 years solving problems before they became crises. Julian stayed on his knees in front of Hope. He didn't move. He didn't stand. He stayed at her level, at her eye line, because he understood something that most powerful men never learn. That authority doesn't always mean standing above someone. Sometimes it means kneeling beside them and saying, "You are not alone," and meaning it. "We're going to figure this out," Julian said, "but I need you to stay. Can you do that? Can you stay?" Hope looked down at Caleb. The boy had shifted in his sleep, turning his face toward Julian's voice, one small hand reaching out and finding Julian's wrist and curling around it. Father and son connected through a sleeping child's grip, with Hope at the center of both. "I've been running for 4 years, she said. Her voice was barely there, a ghost of a voice. "I don't remember how to stay." "Then start tonight," Julian said. "One night, that's all I'm asking." Hope closed her eyes. A tear slid down each cheek, tracing parallel lines through the exhaustion on her face. She held Caleb. She felt Julian's hand steady over hers, and she made a decision that terrified her more than the man standing outside the gates. She stayed. And in the streetlight beyond the walls, Pastor Gabriel Okoro unclenched his hands, slipped his phone into his pocket, and walked calmly toward a black sedan parked at the end of the block. He opened the rear door. Inside, a woman sat in the passenger seat, her honey blonde hair catching the streetlight, her sharp green eyes glittering with satisfaction. Vanessa Cole smiled. "She's definitely in there," she said. Gabriel nodded. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners. His deep, resonant voice, the voice that had comforted 4,000 congregants every Sunday for 12 years, filled the car like a hymn. "Then we wait," he said. "She always runs eventually, and when she does, I'll be standing exactly where she lands." He closed the door. The sedan pulled away from the curb without turning on its headlights. And the night, which had already cracked open to reveal something dark and enormous and deeply wrong, settled back into silence. The kind of silence that doesn't mean peace, The kind that means the next thing to happen will be worse. Julian didn't sleep that night. He sat in the leather chair in his study long after Hope had been shown to the guest suite on the second floor, long after Marcus had confirmed the perimeter was locked down and 2 additional security officers had been positioned at the front and rear gates, long after the last caterer's van had pulled away from the service entrance and the ballroom had gone dark. He sat in the chair where Hope had told him her story, and he stared at the wall, and he thought about the things he had missed. Not about Hope, about Elena. The memories came uninvited the way they always did, not in order, not in narrative, but in fragments. Elena laughing in the kitchen, flower on her nose, Caleb on her hip. Elena at the beach in Maine, 3 days before she died, standing at the waterline with her arms crossed over her chest, staring at the ocean like it owed her an answer. Elena checking her phone at 11 p.m., and then deleting something, and then putting the phone face down on the nightstand and saying, when Julian asked, just spam. It wasn't spam. Julian knew that now the way you know something you've always known but refused to look at directly, the way you know the shape of a thing by the shadow it casts. Elena had been afraid, not anxious, not stressed, afraid. And Julian, who could read a balance sheet the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, who could detect a lie in a boardroom negotiation from the way a man shifted his weight from one foot to the other, had looked at the woman he loved and seen only what he wanted to see. She's fine. She's tired. She's overthinking. The phrases had been his armor, his excuse, his failure. He pulled out his phone and opened the file Marcus had compiled 3 hours ago. A background report on Pastor Gabriel Okoro, assembled from public records, news archives, church databases, and the kind of discreet digital forensics that Julian's security team was very good at and very quiet about. The file was 47 pages long. Julian read every word. Gabriel Okoro, 48 years old, born in Houston. Theology degree from a mid-tier seminary in Georgia. Founded New Life Covenant Church in a rented storefront in Trenton, New Jersey, 14 years ago. Grew it to 4,000 members. Annual revenue from tithes and donations, $6.2 million. Owned a 5-bedroom house in a gated community, 2 luxury vehicles, and a vacation property in the Outer Banks. Public image, spotless. Community leader, youth mentor. Regular guest on regional television programs discussing faith, family values, and marriage counseling. 3 commendations from the mayor's office. A letter of appreciation from the governor. Photographed at charity events with police chiefs, school board members, and 2 sitting congressmen. No criminal record, no lawsuits, no complaints filed with any regulatory body. On paper, Gabriel Okoro was exactly what he appeared to be, a beloved man of God who had built something meaningful from nothing. Julian had known men like this before, not pastors specifically, but men whose public armor was so meticulously constructed that attacking it felt like attacking goodness itself. Men who understood that reputation wasn't just protection, it was a weapon, because when a man like Gabriel Okoro was accused of something terrible, the accusation didn't land on him. It bounced off his image and landed on the accuser. The world didn't ask, did he do it? The world asked, why would she lie about someone so good? Julian kept reading. Page 23. A brief mention in a local newspaper from 6 years ago. A woman named Priscilla Okoro, Gabriel's first wife, had filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. The filing was withdrawn 11 days later. No further records, no interview, no public statement. Priscilla Okoro had simply vanished from the public record as cleanly as if she'd been erased. Julian flagged the page. He kept reading. Page 31. A police report from 4 years ago. A wellness check requested by Gabriel Okoro on his wife, Hope Nderu Okoro, who he described as suffering from a psychiatric episode and potentially a danger to herself and our minor child. The responding officers had transported Hope to Greenfield Behavioral Health Center. Voluntary admission was checked on the intake form, but Julian noticed something the officers apparently hadn't. The signature on the voluntary admission form didn't match Hope's handwriting on her driver's license, which was also in the file. The letters were too uniform, too controlled. The kind of penmanship that comes from copying rather than signing. Someone had forged her admission. Made it look voluntary so there would be no legal challenge. And the facility, Greenfield Behavioral Health, appeared on page 34 of Marcus's report as a recipient of annual donations from New Life Covenant Church. $40,000 a year for the past 7 years. Julian set the tablet down. He pressed his palms flat against the desk and breathed through the rage that was building in his chest like steam in a sealed pipe. This wasn't just abuse. This was engineering. Gabriel Okoro hadn't just hurt Hope. He had built an infrastructure of control, financial, institutional, social, legal, that made escape nearly impossible and disbelief nearly guaranteed. Every system that should have protected her had been quietly, methodically turned into a wall. And then Julian reached page 39, and the rage went cold. Greenfield Behavioral Health Center. Board of Directors, 7 names. Julian scanned them without expectation, and then his eyes stopped on the 5th name and the room tilted. Dr. Richard Ames. Julian knew that name. He knew it because it was written on a document he had looked at exactly once, 14 months ago, and had never been able to forget. Dr. Richard Ames was the physician who had signed Elena's death certificate, the doctor at the small coastal hospital in Maine who had examined the evidence, or lack of it, and declared Elena Ashworth dead by accidental drowning, despite the fact that her body was never recovered. Julian stared at the name. His hands had gone still on the desk. His breathing had changed. Slower, deeper. The breathing of a man whose body was preparing for something his mind hadn't fully processed yet. Dr. Richard Ames sat on the board of the psychiatric facility that Gabriel Okoro funded. The same Dr. Richard Ames who had signed off on Elena's death without a body. The same facility where Hope had been imprisoned for 6 months. It could be a coincidence. Julian's rational mind offered this immediately, the way it always did. The cool, analytical voice that had built a $12 billion empire by separating signal from noise. Small-town doctors served on multiple boards. Medical professionals in rural areas wore many hats. The connection between Ames and Greenfield could be entirely innocent. But Julian's gut, the part of him that had sensed something wrong in Elena's eyes weeks before Maine, the part that had watched his son run across a ballroom to a stranger and known, instantly and completely, that the stranger mattered, his gut said otherwise. His gut said that the web connecting Gabriel Okoro, Greenfield Behavioral Health, Dr. Richard Ames, and the coastal hospital in Maine was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. And at the center of that pattern, like a spider waiting in silk, sat a man in a clerical collar with a smile that made people trust him. Julian picked up his phone. It was 4:17 a.m. He called Daniel Whitfield anyway. The attorney answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Lawyers like Whitfield didn't sleep the way normal people slept. They dozed in shifts, like submarine captains, always half ready for the next crisis. Julian, talk to me. I need you here by 8. Bring your investigator. The one who handled the Moreno case. A pause. The Moreno case had involved a corrupt judge, a forged custody order, and a child who had been illegally removed from the country. Whitfield's investigator, a woman named Renata Souza, former FBI, built like a marathon runner and twice as relentless, had tracked the child to Sao Paulo in 9 days. She didn't do small cases. That level of serious, Whitfield said. Not a question. That level and then some. I'll brief you when you arrive. And Daniel, I need everything you can find on a man named Gabriel Okoro, pastor. Life Covenant Church, Trenton, New Jersey. Especially his first wife, a woman named Priscilla. Priscilla Okoro, Whitfield repeated. Julian could hear him writing. What am I looking for? I'm looking for whether she's alive, Julian said. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that happens between two men who have known each other for 25 years and don't need to explain when something has crossed from unusual into dangerous. 8 o'clock, Whitfield said. I'll have Renata on a plane by 6. Julian hung up. He sat in the dark for another moment, the tablet glowing in front of him, Dr. Richard Ames's name burning on the screen like a coal. Then he stood, walked to the window and looked out at the front gate. The street was empty. Gabriel's sedan was gone. But Julian knew, the way prey knows when a predator has merely circled out of sight rather than left, that the man hadn't gone far. He closed the curtain and went upstairs. The guest suite was at the end of the second-floor hallway, separated from the master bedroom by 3 doors and a small sitting area. Julian approached quietly. The door was slightly ajar. He'd told Hope she didn't need to lock it, that the house was secure, but he suspected she'd left it open not out of trust but out of survival instinct. A locked door meant a locked escape route. A woman who had been trapped would always want a way out. He didn't enter. He stood in the hallway and listened. Silence, then the smallest sound. A breath catching, a shudder. The muffled, controlled weeping of someone crying into a pillow so they wouldn't be heard. The sound of a woman who had held herself together for 4 years through sheer will and had finally reached a place where the walls were thick enough and the night was dark enough to let go. Julian leaned against the hallway wall. He closed his eyes. And he stood there, not intruding, not rescuing, just present, a man standing guard outside a door while a woman he barely knew wept on the other side. He stayed until the crying stopped, until her breathing evened out, until the house went completely silent except for the hum of the heating system and the distant tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer. Then he walked to Caleb's room. The boy wasn't in his bed. Julian's heart seized for the half-second it took to scan the room before he found him, not on the floor beside the bed, which was his usual post, but standing at the window in his pajamas, his blue knitted blanket clutched to his chest, staring down at the driveway with those serious, ancient brown eyes. "Caleb," Julian said softly. The boy didn't turn around, but he spoke, quietly, clearly, as if the dam that had held his voice captive for 14 months had cracked open completely, and the words were flowing out with a force he couldn't and didn't want to stop. The man outside was smiling, Daddy. Julian's blood went cold. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside his son at the window. The driveway was empty now, the gates closed, the streetlights casting long amber pools across the asphalt. "You saw him?" Julian asked, keeping his voice even. Caleb nodded. His curly hair brushed against the glass. He was looking at the house. He was smiling like the men on TV smile when they want you to send money. Julian almost laughed. Almost. The observation was so precise, so unexpectedly sharp, that it cut through the darkness like a blade of light. His son, silent for 14 months, presumed locked inside himself by every specialist in the country, had been watching, listening, processing, understanding. He hadn't been absent. He'd been waiting for something worth speaking about. "Caleb," Julian said. "The woman from tonight, Hope, you ran to her." Caleb nodded again. "Why?" The boy was quiet for a long moment. His small fingers worked the edge of his blanket. Elena's blanket. The one she'd knitted during her pregnancy, the one that still smelled very faintly of her perfume. "She had the same face Mummy had," Caleb said. "Not the outside face, the inside one. The scared one she didn't want me to see." Julian's throat closed. He pulled his son against his chest, pressing his face into those impossible curls, and held him with a grip that was probably too tight, but that neither of them wanted to loosen. "I tried to tell Mummy it was okay to be scared," Caleb whispered against Julian's shoulder. "But she couldn't hear me. She went in the water, and she couldn't hear me anymore." His small body shook. "I don't want the lady to go in the water, Daddy." Julian held his son. He held him the way he should have held Elena, with his eyes open, with his attention fully present, with the understanding that love isn't a feeling but an act of vigilance, of choosing, every single day, to see the people in front of you clearly, even when clarity is terrifying. "She's not going in the water," Julian said. His voice was rough, cracked, the voice of a man making a promise he intended to keep with every cell in his body. "Nobody is going in the water. Not her, not you, not anyone. I'm going to make sure of it." Caleb pulled back and looked at his father. Those big brown eyes, Elena's shape with Julian's intensity, searched Julian's face with a seriousness that no 3-year-old should possess, and that this particular 3-year-old had earned. "Promise?" Caleb said. "Promise," Julian said. Caleb studied him for one more moment. Then he nodded. A small, solemn nod, the nod of a child who has decided to trust his father one more time, and climbed into bed, pulling the blue blanket to his chin. Julian tucked him in. He smoothed the curls he couldn't manage. He kissed the forehead that was half Elena's architecture and half his own. And he sat on the edge of the bed until the boy's breathing deepened and his small body went slack with sleep. Then Julian went back to his study, opened his laptop, and began building a case. Not a legal case, not yet. That was Whitfield's territory. This was something more personal, more architectural. Julian was mapping connections. Gabriel Okoro, Greenfield Behavioral Health, Dr. Richard Ames, the Coastal Hospital in Maine, Elena's death certificate, the missing body, the unasked questions, the convenience of an accidental drowning that had been accepted without challenge because Julian had been too shattered to challenge it, and because the doctor who signed the certificate had the credibility of a medical professional with no apparent motive to lie. But Dr. Richard Ames did have a motive. If he sat on the board of a facility funded by Gabriel Okoro's church, then he had a financial relationship with a man who was now standing outside Julian's gates. A man whose ex-wife had just been found, by chance, in the home of the widower whose wife Ames had declared dead. Julian didn't believe in chance. He believed in patterns, and the pattern forming in front of him, sprawling, tentacled, connecting people and places and events he had assumed were unrelated, was beginning to look less like coincidence and more like design. At 5:48 a.m., his phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Perimeter clear. No activity since 2 a.m. But I ran the sedan's plates. Registered to New Life Covenant Church, Trenton, NJ. And Julian, the car has been to this neighborhood before. 3 times in the past 6 months, long before tonight. Julian read the text twice. 3 times in 6 months. Gabriel hadn't found Hope tonight. He had been watching this neighborhood, Julian's neighborhood, for months. The question was why. Had he been tracking Hope this entire time, waiting for her to surface? Or had he been watching Julian's house specifically, for a reason that had nothing to do with Hope and everything to do with Elena? Julian set the phone down. He looked at the map he'd been building, the web of names and places and financial threads, and felt for the first time since Elena died that he was close to something. Not understanding, not yet, but proximity. The sense that the truth was not buried miles below the surface but inches beneath his feet, pressing upward, waiting to break through. At 7:15 a.m., he heard footsteps in the hallway, light, hesitant. The footsteps of a person calculating whether each step was safe before taking the next one. Hope appeared in the study doorway. She was still wearing the maid's uniform from the night before. She had nothing else. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her cropped hair was pressed flat on one side from the pillow. The scar above her left eyebrow caught the early morning light coming through the window. She looked exhausted. She looked afraid. And she looked, for the first time since Julian had met her, like she had made a decision. "Mr. Ashworth," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had been the night before. Still quiet. She might never speak above a certain volume again, but grounded in a way that hadn't been there in the ballroom. "I need to tell you something I didn't tell you last night." Julian straightened in his chair. "Okay." Hope stepped into the room. She didn't sit. She stood near the door, always near the door, and wrapped her arms around herself. "Gabriel's first wife," she said, "Priscilla. Everyone thinks she left him. That's the story he tells. That she had an affair and moved to Florida and cut ties with the church." Julian waited. "She didn't leave," Hope said. "I found letters in his study 3 months before I tried to escape the last time. Letters from Priscilla, not to Gabriel, to a lawyer, describing everything he'd done to her, the beatings, the control, the isolation. She was building a case. She was going to expose him." Hope's voice dropped to something barely above breath. "The letters stopped 6 years ago. Priscilla never filed. She never went public. She never contacted the lawyer again." Hope looked at Julian with eyes that held the weight of a truth she had carried alone for 4 years. "I don't think she left, Mr. Ashworth. I think she's dead. And I think Gabriel made sure no one ever looked for her, the same way he's making sure no one believes me." The room went very still. Julian looked at the map on his screen, at the web of names, at Dr. Richard Ames, sitting at the intersection of Greenfield and Main, connecting a psychiatric prison and a death certificate with no body. "Hope," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." She nodded. "The resort in Maine where my wife drowned, Elena Ashworth, 14 months ago. The Pinecrest Resort, on the coast near Bar Harbor." He watched her face. "Did Gabriel ever mention it? Did he ever go there? Did you ever hear the name?" Hope's brow furrowed. She was thinking. Genuinely thinking, not performing thought. Julian could see the difference, the way her eyes moved left and slightly up, accessing memory rather than constructing narrative. "Pinecrest," she repeated. Then her face changed, not dramatically. A micro shift, a widening of the eyes so slight that most people would miss it. But Julian didn't miss things anymore. Not after Elena. Not ever again. "Gabriel went to a retreat," Hope said slowly. "A pastoral retreat. In Maine. About 2 years ago. I remember because he was gone for a week, and it was the only time in our marriage I felt like I could breathe." She paused. "I remember the name because I thought it sounded beautiful. Like a place where things grow." She looked at Julian. "Pinecrest," she whispered, and the web on Julian's screen grew one thread tighter. Daniel Whitfield arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, the way he arrived everywhere. Precisely on time, impeccably dressed, and carrying the quiet intensity of a man who had spent 30 years turning other people's catastrophes into victories. He was 51, lean, with skin the color of polished mahogany and silver-rimmed glasses that made him look like a professor, until he opened his mouth and you realized he was a weapon. He wore a navy suit with no tie, a habit he'd picked up from Julian in college and never dropped, and he carried a single leather briefcase that Julian knew from experience contained more firepower than most law firms deployed in a year. Behind him walked Renata Souza, 44, 5'7", the kind of woman you'd pass on the street without a second glance, which was exactly the point. She had light brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and the lean, coiled build of someone who ran 10 miles every morning not for fitness, but for the discipline of it. Her eyes were her most notable feature, dark still, and patient in the way that a camera lens is patient. She saw everything. She recorded everything, and she never, ever forgot. Marcus met them at the front door and led them to the study. Julian was waiting, standing behind his desk, the tablet propped against a stack of Elena's art books, the web of connections he'd built overnight glowing on the screen. He hadn't slept. He hadn't changed. The charcoal Brioni suit from the gala was wrinkled at the elbows and stained with champagne at the knees from when he'd knelt on the ballroom floor, and he didn't care. "You look like hell," Whitfield said, setting his briefcase on the desk. "I've had a productive night," Julian replied. "Those are usually the same thing." Whitfield sat in the leather chair across from the desk, the same chair Hope had sat in hours ago, and crossed one leg over the other. "Talk to me." From the beginning, Julian talked. He started with the gala, with Caleb's silence, with the scream, with the boy running across a ballroom to a maid he'd never met and speaking his first words in 14 months. He told them about Hope, about her ex-husband, the pastor, about the abuse, the forged psychiatric commitment, the escape, the 4 years of running. He told them about Grace, the 9-year-old daughter Hope hadn't seen since the night she was dragged from a women's shelter. He told them about Vanessa's phone call to New Life Covenant Church, about Gabriel standing outside the gates, smiling at the camera, about the sedan that had been in the neighborhood 3 times in 6 months. Then he told them about Dr. Richard Ames. Whitfield, who had listened to everything with the same composed attention he brought to depositions, leaned forward when Julian laid out the connection. Ames on the board of Greenfield Behavioral Health. Ames signing Elena's death certificate in Maine. Ames sitting at the intersection of 2 tragedies that should have had nothing to do with each other. "That's thin," Whitfield said carefully. "A doctor on a hospital board who also works in a coastal town. It could be coincidence," Julian finished. "I know, I've been telling myself that all night, but there's more." He pulled up the vehicle records Marcus had sent. Gabriel's church sedan, in this neighborhood, 3 times in the past 6 months, before last night, before Hope was anywhere near this house. Why was he here, Daniel? What was he watching? Whitfield took off his glasses and cleaned them, a habit Julian recognized as his processing mechanism, the equivalent of a computer's loading screen. When the glasses went back on, the processing was done. "You think there's a connection between this pastor and Elena's death," Whitfield said. "Not a question." "I think I don't know what I think," Julian said. "And that's exactly why I called you, because I missed the signs with Elena. I saw the fear and I told myself it was stress. I saw the locked doors and the deleted messages and the way she flinched when the phone rang after 9 p.m. And I told myself she was tired, she was overthinking, she was going through something that would pass. It didn't pass. She's dead. And I will not make the same mistake with this woman." The room was quiet for a moment. Renata, who had been standing near the window with her arms folded, spoke for the first time. Her voice was measured, unhurried, with a faint accent she'd never fully explained the origin of. "The first wife," she said. "Gabriel Okoro. You said she vanished. Hope told me Priscilla was building a legal case against Gabriel, writing letters to a lawyer, documenting everything, and then the letters stopped. 6 years ago. No forwarding address. No social media. No employment records. Nothing." Renata's eyes narrowed. Not dramatically, just the slightest tightening at the corners, the way a lens adjusts focus. "I'll start with Priscilla," she said. "If she's alive, I'll find her. If she's not, I'll find that too. And I'll need access to your wife's case file. The drowning. Everything the police and the medical examiner produced." Julian nodded. He'd already anticipated this. "Marcus will give you everything we have, including the original death certificate signed by Ames." "One more thing," Renata said. "The woman. Hope. I need to talk to her." "Carefully," Julian said. The word came out harder than he intended. He heard it and softened. "She's fragile right now. She's been running for 4 years, and the man she's running from was standing outside my gates 12 hours ago. She agreed to stay one night. I don't know if she'll stay for a second." Renata studied him. There was something in her dark eyes that wasn't quite judgment, but wasn't quite neutral either. the assessment of a woman who had spent 20 years in the FBI, reading the distance between what people said and what they meant. You care about her, Renata said. Julian met her gaze. I care about the truth. I care about my son who spoke for the first time in 14 months because of her. And I care about the fact that a man who may be connected to my wife's death is standing outside my home. If that looks like caring about her, then yes, I care. Renata nodded once. She didn't push it. She didn't need to. She had gotten her answer, and it was the one she'd expected. Whitfield opened his briefcase. Here's what I can do right now. I'll file for an emergency protective order against Gabriel Okoro on Hope's behalf. Stalking, harassment, fraudulent psychiatric commitment. We have enough for an initial filing. I'll also initiate a formal review of the custody arrangement for the daughter. If the psychiatric hold that formed the basis of the custody ruling was forged, the entire custody order is potentially void. How fast? Julian asked. Protective order 48 hours if we get the right judge. Custody review, weeks, maybe months. Family court doesn't move fast, especially when a prominent community figure is involved. Then make it move, Julian said, whatever it costs. Julian. Whitfield's voice carried the tone he used when he was about to say something his client didn't want to hear. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me as your lawyer, not as your friend. Julian waited. This woman, Hope, you met her 12 hours ago. You've heard her side of the story. Her side only. You're about to spend significant resources, legal, financial, investigative, on a woman whose real name you only learned last night. Whitfield held up a hand before Julian could respond. I'm not doubting her. I'm doing my job. Because if we go after a pastor with 4,000 congregants and political connections and a public image that would make a saint jealous, we need to be absolutely certain that every word she's told you is true. Because he will come at us, and he will come at her. And if there is a single crack in her story, he will drive a truck through it. Julian absorbed this. He appreciated it. This is why he paid Whitfield, not for comfort, but for clarity. Verify everything, Julian said. Every claim, every date. The commitment at Greenfield, the police report she filed, the miscarriage, the forged signature on the admission form. I want independent confirmation of all of it before we file anything. Whitfield nodded. Good. Renata. Give me 24 hours, Renata said. She was already typing on her phone. I'll have preliminary verification on the psychiatric commitment and the custody ruling by end of day. Priscilla Okoro will take longer, but I'll have something. They went to work. Whitfield set up in the dining room, transforming the long mahogany table into a command center of legal pads, laptops, and color-coded folders. Renata disappeared into the wing of the house Marcus used as a security office where the monitoring equipment lived. Marcus himself was coordinating with the 2 additional guards on the perimeter, running license plate checks on every vehicle that had passed the estate in the last 24 hours. Julian stood alone in his study for a moment, surrounded by the machinery he'd set in motion, and felt the strange vertigo of a man who has stepped off a ledge and is waiting to discover whether he's falling or flying. Then he went upstairs to check on Hope. She wasn't in the guest suite. Julian's heart rate spiked before his rational brain could intervene. He checked the bathroom, empty. The hallway, empty. The sitting area between the guest suite and the master bedroom, empty. His chest tightened. She ran. She woke up and she ran. The way she's been running for 4 years. The way she'll keep running until... He heard it, coming from Caleb's room. A voice. Low, soft, musical. Not singing exactly, telling a story. The cadence of it was rhythmic, hypnotic, the kind of voice that wraps around a child like a blanket and holds them in the space between waking and sleeping. Julian moved to the doorway and stopped. Hope was sitting on the floor beside Caleb's bed, her back against the wall, her legs crossed, still in the black maid's uniform. Caleb was lying on his stomach on the bed, his chin propped on his hands, his blue blanket bunched under his chest. His eyes were open, wide open, and focused on Hope with an intensity that Julian had never seen from his son, not even before Elena died. Hope was telling him a story, not reading from a book, telling it, from memory, from imagination, from some well of narrative that lived inside her, and the little fox didn't know where to go. Hope was saying, her rough hands gesturing gently as she spoke. He'd been walking so long that his paws were sore and his tail was dragging in the dirt. Every forest he entered, the trees would whisper, "You don't belong here." Every river he crossed, the water would say, "Keep moving." And the little fox started to believe them. He started to think that maybe there wasn't a place in the whole world that was meant for him. Caleb's lips parted. But there was, he said. Right? Julian gripped the doorframe. His son was having a conversation. A real, spontaneous, back-and-forth conversation, with full sentences and emotional engagement, and the kind of anticipatory logic that his specialists had said might take years to recover, if it recovered at all. Hope smiled. It was the first time Julian had seen her smile, and it transformed her face the way sunrise transforms a landscape, not by adding something new, but by revealing what was already there. The sharp cheekbones became elegant instead of gaunt. The dark circles beneath her eyes softened into something that looked like wisdom rather than exhaustion. The scar above her eyebrow caught the light, and instead of looking like damage, it looked like proof. Proof that she had survived something and was still here, still breathing, still capable of sitting on a floor and telling a story to a child who needed her. There was, Hope said, but the fox had to stop running to find it. He had to sit down in the middle of the road, right where he was, and say, "I'm tired. I'm staying here." And when he did that, when he finally stopped, he looked around, and he realized the place he'd been looking for wasn't ahead of him or behind him. It was wherever he decided to stand still. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he said, "Is that a true story?" Hope's smile faded, not into sadness exactly, into something more honest. "It's the story I tell myself when I'm scared," she said. "So I hope it's true. I'm still figuring it out." Caleb sat up in bed. He reached out and touched Hope's scar, gently, the way children touch things they don't understand but sense are important. Hope went very still but didn't pull away. "Did someone hurt you?" Caleb asked. "Yes," Hope said, simply, without the drama, without evasion. The answer a child deserved, honest, direct, and delivered with the kind of calm that told Caleb the truth wasn't something to be afraid of. "My mummy was hurt too," Caleb said. "She tried to hide it, but I could see it in her eyes." The inside face. Hope's composure cracked just for a second. A tremor moved through her jaw, her lips pressed tight, and then she rebuilt herself. Quickly, efficiently, the way a woman who has been cracking and rebuilding for years learns to do it in seconds rather than hours. "Your mummy sounds very brave," Hope said. "She was," Caleb said, "but she couldn't stay." The sentence, delivered with the flat, matter-of-fact grief of a child who has processed loss not through therapy or conversation but through the slow, solitary work of being too young to understand and too old to forget, hit Julian like a physical blow. He pressed his shoulder against the doorframe and breathed through it. "Caleb," Hope said carefully, "can I tell you something?" The boy nodded. "Sometimes people can't stay, not because they don't want to, but because they're not safe enough to, and that's not their fault. It's the fault of whatever made them unsafe." She paused, chose her next words with the precision of someone who understood that what you say to a grieving child becomes part of their architecture. "Your mummy loved you. I can see it in you, in the way you ran to me last night. You ran to me because you saw someone who was scared, and instead of being afraid of the fear, you tried to help. That's what love teaches a child to do. Your mummy taught you that." Caleb stared at her. His big brown eyes filled slowly the way a glass fills under a gentle tap, not overflowing, just reaching the edge. A single tear slid down his light brown cheek. "I miss her," he said. "I know," Hope said. "I miss someone too. Your daughter." Hope blinked. She hadn't told him about Grace. She was certain of it. "How did you hold me the way my mummy held me," Caleb said. "Like you've practiced. Like you had someone to practice on." Julian closed his eyes in the doorway. His 3-year-old son, who the world thought was broken, was the most perceptive person in the house. Hope didn't try to hide her tears this time. They fell freely, silently, tracking down her cheeks and dripping onto the collar of her black uniform. She didn't wipe them. Her hands were in her lap, palms up, as if she were surrendering something she'd held onto for too long. "Her name is Grace," Hope whispered. "She's 9. I haven't seen her in 4 years. Why? Because the man who hurt me took her, and the world believed him instead of me." Caleb considered this with the gravity of a child who understood injustice not as a concept but as a lived experience. The injustice of being 3 years old and losing your mother and being expected to process it in silence. "My daddy will help," he said. "He's really good at fixing things, except my hair. He's bad at my hair." Hope laughed. The sound burst out of her before she could contain it. Short, wet, unexpected, like rain from a clear sky. She pressed her hand over her mouth immediately, as if laughter were a luxury she couldn't afford, a sound that might give away her position. Julian stepped into the room. Hope saw him and tensed. The automatic reaction, the recalibration of safety, the assessment of threat. But it passed faster than it had the night before, a fraction of a second instead of a full breath. Progress, Julian thought. Small, measurable progress. He's right, you know, Julian said. He kept his voice light. Caleb's word echoed in his head. Really good at fixing things except my hair. And he held onto it like a lifeline. I am terrible at his hair. Hope wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I noticed, she said. And there it was, not a smile, not yet, but the ghost of one, the muscle memory of a woman who had once been capable of warmth and humor and connection, buried under 4 years of survival but not dead. Not yet. We need to talk, Julian said. Downstairs, my lawyer is here, and an investigator. They're going to help, but they need to hear your story directly. Hope's body language shifted. The openness she'd shown Caleb, the crossed legs, the palms up, the unguarded posture, contracted. Her shoulders came in. Her chin dropped. The armor went back on, piece by piece, in the space of a single breath. I've told my story before, she said quietly, to police, to lawyers, to judges, to shelter workers. Every time I told it, someone found a reason not to believe me. Or they believed me but couldn't help. Or they helped for a week and then moved on. Stories don't save people, Mr. Ashworth. Resources do. Power does. And I don't have either. Julian knelt, not for dramatic effect, but because she was sitting on the floor and he wanted to be at her level, the way he'd been at Caleb's level in the ballroom. Eye to eye, equal ground. You didn't have either, he said. Bastancy. As of 12 hours ago, you have both. Because I have both, and I'm choosing to put them behind you. Hope searched his face. The same way she'd searched it the night before, looking for the catch, the angle, the hidden cost. Julian let her look. He had nothing to hide. Not from her, not anymore. Why? She asked. The same question she'd asked in the ballroom. The same word, carrying the same weight. Why would a man with $12 billion and a broken son and a dead wife, and a life full of complications, voluntarily take on one more? Julian looked at Caleb. The boy was watching them both with those ancient, serious eyes, following the conversation the way a child follows a ball in a game, tracking the trajectory, anticipating where it would land. Because my son used his first words in 14 months to protect you, Julian said, and the last time someone in my life needed protection, I was too late. I will not be too late again. Hope held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Julian counted. Then she nodded, once, small, almost imperceptible, and began to stand. Caleb scrambled off the bed and grabbed her hand. Not clutching this time, just holding. The way you hold someone's hand when you're walking together and you want them to know you're there. Hope looked down at the boy. The boy looked up at her. And something passed between them. Not words, not logic, not anything that could be recorded or measured. But Julian saw it. A recognition. A mutual understanding between two broken people who had found, in each other, a reason to stop running. The 3 of them walked downstairs together. Julian in front. Hope behind him. Caleb between them, one hand in Hope's grip, his blue blanket dragging behind him like a flag of truce. They had just reached the bottom of the staircase when the doorbell rang. Marcus appeared instantly, his hand moving to the concealed weapon at his hip, a reflex Julian had never seen him deploy inside the house. It's not the pastor, Marcus said, checking the security monitor on his phone. It's a woman, mid-30s, broad, expensive coat. She says she's here to collect her things. Vanessa. Julian's jaw tightened. He looked at Hope. She had gone pale, her fingers tightening around Caleb's hand. The boy moved closer to her instinctively, pressing himself against her leg. Stay here, Julian said to Hope. Both of you. Marcus, put them in the study. Lock the door. Julian, Hope started. I need 5 minutes, Julian said. His voice carried the calm, controlled authority that made boards of directors fall silent and competitors reconsider. 5 minutes, and she will never set foot in this house again. He straightened his wrinkled suit. He pushed a hand through his hair. And he walked to the front door to face the woman who had sold Hope's location to a predator and called it strategy. Julian opened the door. Vanessa stood on the top step in a cream cashmere coat, oversized sunglasses pushed up on her honey blonde hair, a leather tote slung over one shoulder. She looked immaculate. She always looked immaculate. It was part of her machinery, the polish, the composure, the appearance of someone who had never once been caught off guard. But Julian saw the tension in her jaw, the way her red-nailed fingers gripped the strap of her bag a fraction too tightly. She knew something had shifted. She just didn't know how much. Good morning, she said and smiled, the smile that didn't reach her green eyes. the smile that was designed to disarm and control and redirect. Julian had once found it attractive. Now it looked like what it was, a tool. I left a few things in the upstairs closet last week, Vanessa continued, her tone breezy, as if the previous night hadn't happened. As if she hadn't called a man's church to report the location of the woman he'd been hunting for 4 years. My Dior clutch and that navy wrap, I'll just run up and grab them. She moved to step inside. Julian didn't move. His 6'2" frame filled the doorway like a wall. You're not coming in, he said. Vanessa's smile held, but her eyes changed. The green irises sharpened, the way a blade sharpens when it catches the light. Excuse me? Your things will be sent to your apartment by courier this afternoon. Every item, but you are not entering this house. Vanessa lowered her sunglasses slowly. The gesture was deliberate, meant to expose the full force of her gaze, the emerald intensity she'd weaponized in 100 social situations. Julian, you're overreacting. Last night was a scene. That woman caused a disruption at your event and I responded. If you think you called him, the words landed between them like a dropped grenade. Vanessa's face didn't change, not visibly, not in any way a casual observer would detect. But Julian saw the micro-freeze, the half-second pause where her brain rerouted from one script to another, the almost invisible flicker of her left eyelid. She was calculating, deciding whether to deny, deflect, or admit. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Script 1, Danielle. At 10:47 p.m. last night, you made a 4-minute and 22-second phone call from your cell phone to the administrative office of New Life Covenant Church in Trenton, New Jersey, Julian said. His voice was perfectly level, perfectly calm. The voice of a man presenting evidence, not making accusations. The church is run by a man named Gabriel Okoro. He is the ex-husband of the woman you spent the evening attacking. He arrived outside my gates less than 15 minutes after your call. Vanessa's jaw tightened. The mask slipped just a millimeter, and something ugly flashed behind her eyes. Not guilt, irritation. The annoyance of a strategist whose moves had been exposed. I was trying to protect you, she said. Script 2, deflection. That woman was clearly unhinged. Your son was hysterical. I did what anyone would do. I tried to find out who she was. I found a missing person report online. A concerned husband looking for his mentally ill wife. I called the number listed because I thought it was the responsible thing to do. The responsible thing, Julian repeated. Yes, for you. For Caleb. For this family. Julian looked at her. Really looked. The way he'd looked at Hope the night before. Not at the surface, not at the presentation, but at the machinery beneath. And what he saw was clear and cold and final. Vanessa Cole did not love him. She had never loved him. She loved what he represented. The access, the status, the $12 billion infrastructure that would elevate her from wealthy to untouchable. She had positioned herself in his life the way she positioned herself in every room, strategically, calculating angles and exits, always serving herself first and calling it service to others. And when a trembling woman in a maid's uniform had threatened that position, not through any action of her own, but simply by existing in a way that drew Julian's attention, Vanessa had responded not with compassion, not with curiosity, not with the basic human decency of asking, "Are you okay?" She had responded by calling the woman's abuser and handing him her location. That wasn't protection, that was elimination. Vanessa, Julian said, we're done. She stared at him. For a long moment the mask stayed in place. The composed, beautiful, unshakable exterior she had built and maintained for 36 years of strategic living. Then it cracked, not into vulnerability, into fury. You're ending this over a maid? She hissed. Over a woman you met 12 hours ago who showed up at your party in a cleaning uniform? Do you hear yourself? She's nobody, Julian. She's a mother who hasn't seen her daughter in 4 years because a man you called concerned had her locked in a psychiatric ward with a forged diagnosis, Julian said. She's a woman who's been beaten, controlled, and hunted for the better part of a decade. And she's currently sitting in my study holding my son because my 3-year-old, the one you were so worried about last night, chose her over every other person in a room of 300, including you. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed, opened again. You will regret this, she said. The words were quiet and precise and carried the edge of a threat that wasn't theatrical but operational. Vanessa Cole didn't make empty threats. She made promises and kept them. Maybe, Julian said, but I'll regret it on my own terms. Marcus will have your things sent today. Don't come back. He closed the door, gently, without force. The soft click of the latch was louder than any slam could have been. Julian stood in the foyer for a moment, his hand still on the doorknob, and breathed. Then he turned and walked back toward the study, where a woman who had been running for 4 years was sitting with a boy who had been silent for 14 months, and both of them were waiting for him to tell them what happened next. He didn't have all the answers yet, but he was building them, brick by brick, connection by connection, thread by thread. And somewhere in the city, in a black sedan with plates registered to New Life Covenant Church, Pastor Gabriel Okoro received a text message from a number he recognized. Vanessa. He knows about the call. He ended things. She's still in the house. He's hired lawyers. Gabriel read the message. He didn't respond immediately. He sat in the back seat, his Bible open on his lap, not reading it, just holding it, the way a soldier holds a weapon between engagements, and watched the morning traffic flow past the tinted windows. Then he typed a single response. Good, let him build his walls. I've been inside walls before. They always have a door. He closed the phone. He opened the Bible to Proverbs. And he read, with the patience of a man who had been hunting for 4 years and had learned that the prey always makes the same mistake. They stop running. They think they're safe. And that's when they're the most vulnerable. Gabriel smiled. The warm, crinkled, trustworthy smile that 4,000 people loved. And he waited. Renata worked fast. She worked the way wildfire works, quiet at the edges, devastating at the center, and impossible to stop once it found oxygen. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, 8 hours after she'd arrived at the Ashworth estate, she had assembled a preliminary file that she spread across the dining room table in front of Julian and Whitfield with the methodical precision of a surgeon laying out instruments before an operation. I'll start with what I can confirm, she said. Her voice carried no emotion. Renata didn't trade in emotion. She traded in facts, and facts were what she placed on the table now. Printed documents, screenshots, time-stamped records, and a single photograph that she kept face down until the end. Hope Nderu, born Hope Amara Nderu, 39 years old, born in Baltimore. Nursing degree from Towson University, graduated with honors. Licensed as a registered nurse in Maryland. License active until it was suspended 4 years ago. Not for malpractice, not for misconduct, but because she failed to renew while she was institutionalized at Greenfield Behavioral Health. The license wasn't revoked, it lapsed. There's a difference, and it matters legally. She laid down a document, Hope's nursing license, annotated with renewal dates and the gap that corresponded exactly to her 6 months at Greenfield. Married Gabriel Okoro 8 years ago. Marriage certificate filed in Essex County, New Jersey. One child, Grace Nderu Okoro, born 7 years ago. I've confirmed the birth certificate, the hospital records, and the pediatrician's file. Grace is real. She's enrolled in a private Christian school affiliated with New Life Covenant Church. She's in 4th grade. Her emergency contacts are listed as Gabriel Okoro and a church elder named Deacon Margaret Tills. Hope's name appears nowhere in the school's records. She's been erased. Julian felt the word like a blade. Erased. Not forgotten, not absent. Erased. Deliberately, systematically, as if she had never existed in her daughter's official life. The psychiatric commitment, Renata continued. She placed 2 documents side by side. Left, the voluntary admission form filed at Greenfield Behavioral Health, bearing what is purported to be Hope's signature. Right, Hope's signature on her nursing license renewal from 3 years prior. Julian looked. He didn't need to be a handwriting expert. The signatures were different. The one on the nursing license was fluid, slightly slanted left, with a distinctive loop on the H that carried personality and muscle memory. The one on the Greenfield admission was upright, uniform, controlled, the penmanship of someone carefully copying letter shapes rather than signing from habit. Forged, Whitfield said. Not a question. Forged, Renata confirmed. I've already retained a certified forensic document examiner. She'll provide a formal analysis within 72 hours, but her preliminary assessment over the phone was unequivocal. The signature on the admission form was not written by the same person who signed the nursing license. She laid down the next document, the psychiatric evaluation that was used to justify the commitment, signed by Dr. Thomas Weir, a psychiatrist on staff at Greenfield. I pulled Dr. Weir's credentials. He's real. He's licensed. But here's what's interesting. His malpractice insurance is paid by a company called Covenant Health Holdings. I traced the ownership. Covenant Health Holdings is a subsidiary of a nonprofit entity called New Life Community Trust, which is the financial arm of New Life Covenant Church. Julian finished. Gabriel's church pays the malpractice insurance of the doctor who diagnosed Hope as delusional, Renata said. The doctor didn't just work at a facility funded by the church. He was financially dependent on the church. His salary, his insurance, his professional protection, all of it flowed from the same source. He wasn't an independent evaluator. He was an employee, and his diagnosis of Hope was, in my professional assessment, manufactured to order. Whitfield was writing rapidly. Julian could see the legal architecture forming in real time behind the attorney's silver-rimmed glasses. The motions, the filings, the arguments that would dismantle Gabriel's custody claim brick by brick. The custody order, Renata continued. She laid down another document. Granted 4 years ago by Judge Harold Paxton of Essex County Family Court, based entirely on the Greenfield psychiatric evaluation and a testimony from Gabriel describing Hope as a loving but deeply troubled woman whose mental illness makes her a danger to our child. No independent evaluation was ordered. No guardian ad litem was appointed for Grace. The ruling was issued in 11 days, which for a contested custody case is extraordinarily fast. How fast? Julian asked. The average contested custody case in New Jersey takes 4 to 8 months, Whitfield said, looking up from his notes. 11 days means either the evidence was overwhelming or the judge was compromised. Judge Paxton, Renata said, is a member of New Life Covenant Church. He and his wife have been photographed at church fundraisers. His daughter was married in the church by Gabriel personally. He has received campaign contributions from 3 separate donors who are also church elders. The room was quiet. Julian could hear the grandfather clock in the foyer, its tick steady and indifferent to the revelations unfolding in the dining room. So the doctor was bought, Julian said slowly, mapping it aloud. The diagnosis was forged. The signature was faked. The judge was compromised. And the custody was granted in 11 days to a man who had spent 8 years beating his wife. That's the architecture, Renata said. Gabriel didn't just abuse Hope. He built a system, institutional, financial, legal, designed to ensure that if she ever tried to leave, every door she ran to would already be locked from the other side. The police dismissed her. The shelter failed her. The courts ruled against her. And the psychiatric facility imprisoned her. Every system that should have protected her was already inside his network. Julian thought of Hope sitting upstairs in Caleb's room, telling a story about a fox who couldn't find a place to belong. He thought of the way she scanned every room for exits, the way she flinched when someone raised their voice, the way she held Caleb with the practiced tenderness of a mother who had been separated from her own child for 4 years and was pouring all of that stored love into someone else's son because it was the only outlet she had. She hadn't been paranoid. She hadn't been running from shadows. She had been running from a machine, a precisely engineered, well-funded, institutionally embedded machine designed to crush her. And she had survived it through nothing but willpower, invisibility, and the desperate, bone-deep refusal to stop breathing. Now, Renata said. She paused. The pause was deliberate. The pause of someone who knows the next thing they say will change the temperature of the room. Gabriel Okoro. She turned over the photograph she'd kept face down. It was a missing person flyer. Old, the paper was yellowed, the ink faded. A woman's face looked out from the center, mid-30s, dark skin, kind eyes. A wide smile that showed a gap between her front teeth. The text beneath read, "Have you seen this woman? Gabriel Okoro. Last seen March 14, 2019. Aged disappearance, 34. Height 5'4". Weight 130 pounds. Any information, please contact the Trenton Police Department." This flyer was distributed by the Trenton PD 6 years ago, Renata said. It was in circulation for approximately 3 weeks before it was pulled. I spoke with a retired detective from Trenton this morning, off the record, as a professional courtesy between former federal employees. He remembers the case. He remembers it because it bothered him. She straightened the flyer on the table. Priscilla Okoro was reported missing by her sister, not by Gabriel. Gabriel's initial statement to police was that Priscilla had left him for another man and moved to Florida. He provided no forwarding address. He expressed no concern. He asked the police not to pursue the matter because it was, in his words, a private family shame that I'd prefer to handle through prayer and counseling. Renata's jaw tightened, the first visible sign of emotion Julian had seen from her. Priscilla's sister didn't buy it. She filed the missing person report independently. The police conducted a preliminary investigation. They interviewed Gabriel, who was cooperative, calm, and sympathetic. He cried during the interview. He told them Priscilla had been having an affair with a man she'd met online, that she'd become spiritually lost, and that he'd tried to save the marriage through pastoral counseling but ultimately had to release her to God's plan. 4 church elders provided statements corroborating his account. 2 of them claimed to have seen Priscilla packing a suitcase, and, Julian said, the detective told me the case was closed in 3 weeks, not because they found Priscilla, because they stopped looking. The detective pushed back. He said something felt wrong, said the husband was too composed, too rehearsed. His supervisor overruled him. The supervisor, Julian, attended New Life Covenant Church. Julian leaned back in his chair. The pattern was complete now, or nearly complete. The same architecture, the same method. Police, courts, medical professionals, community leaders, all either members of the church, recipients of its money, or embedded in its social network. Gabriel hadn't just built a congregation. He'd built an ecosystem, an environment in which he was the apex predator and every institution that might threaten him was already domesticated. Is Priscilla alive? Julian asked. I don't know yet, Renata said. There's no death certificate, no body, no obituary. But there's also no driver's license renewal, no credit card activity, no tax filing, no social media account, no employment record, no medical claim. Nothing for the past 6 years. Priscilla Okoro either left the country under an assumed identity, which is possible but would require resources and planning that her sister says she didn't have, or she's dead, Julian said. Or she never left Trenton, Renata said, which was a more precise way of saying the same thing. The dining room was silent except for the scratch of Whitfield's pen. The attorney had stopped writing and was staring at his legal pad with the fixed concentration of a man doing very fast math in his head. If Priscilla is dead, Whitfield said carefully, and if Gabriel is responsible, then we're not just dealing with a domestic abuser. We're dealing with a murderer who has successfully evaded justice for 6 years by embedding himself in the institutions designed to catch him. Yes, Renata said. And the connection to Elena? Julian asked. He hadn't forgotten. He would never forget. Dr. Richard Ames sat at the center of his map like a pin holding 2 tragedies together. Renata opened a new folder. Dr. Richard Ames, 61. Board certified in internal medicine and forensic pathology. Primary practice in Bar Harbor, Maine. Also serves as a part-time medical examiner for Hancock County, which covers the coastal area including the Pinecrest Resort, where Elena Ashworth drowned. He has served on the board of Greenfield Behavioral Health Center for 9 years. She placed 2 documents side by side. The left, Ames's board appointment letter from Greenfield signed by the facilities director. The right, Elena's death certificate signed by Ames. The same man who sits on the board of Gabriel's church-funded psychiatric prison signed your wife's death certificate, Renata said. And here's what I haven't been able to confirm yet, but what I'm actively pursuing, whether Ames and Gabriel have ever met, whether there's a direct personal or financial relationship between them beyond the institutional connection through Greenfield. The pastoral retreat, Julian said. Hope told me Gabriel attended a retreat at Pinecrest 2 years ago, a week-long stay. Renata made a note. I'll pull Pinecrest guest records. If Gabriel was there, there will be a registration. And if Ames was working as the local maid during the same period, we can establish physical proximity. And if they overlapped? Julian asked. Renata looked at him with those dark, patient camera lens eyes. Then we have a connection between your wife's death and a man who has a documented history of making women disappear. And that changes everything. Julian nodded. He stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the front lawn, pristine, sunlit, absurdly peaceful for a house that was rapidly becoming the center of something that might reach from a charity gala in Connecticut to a psychiatric ward in New Jersey to a death certificate in Maine to a missing woman who hadn't been seen in 6 years. There's one more thing, Renata said behind him, and I need you to hear it before you see hope again. Julian turned. Renata held up her phone. On the screen was a social media post, published 47 minutes ago on the official Facebook page of New Life Covenant Church. The post featured a photograph of Gabriel, warm smile, clerical collar, hands clasped in that gesture of practiced peace, standing at a podium. Beside the photograph was a message, Dear beloved community, please keep our family in your prayers during this difficult time. As many of you know, my former wife, Hope, has been missing for 4 years due to a severe mental health crisis. Last night, through God's grace, I received information that she may have been located in the Connecticut area. I am working with local authorities and mental health professionals to bring her home safely and reunite her with our daughter, Grace, who misses her mother every day. If you have any information, please contact the church office. Let us surround this family with love and prayer. Pastor Gabriel. The post had 847 likes, 312 shares, 194 comments, almost all expressing support, sympathy, and prayers for the devoted father searching for his troubled wife. Julian read it twice. Then he set the phone down on the table with a gentleness that was more frightening than any display of anger would have been. He's controlling the narrative, Whitfield said. Before we've even filed a single document, he's already positioned himself as the victim, the concerned husband, the praying father. If we go public now, we're the aggressors. We're the billionaire and his lawyers attacking a beloved pastor who just wants his sick wife to come home. He's done this before, Renata said. This is his playbook. He builds the story before anyone else can. By the time the truth comes out, if it comes out, the public has already chosen a side. Julian thought of Hope upstairs, telling Caleb a story about a fox. He thought of Grace, drawing pictures every night of a mother she hadn't seen in 4 years. He thought of Priscilla, who had tried to build a legal case against Gabriel and had vanished. He thought of Elena, who had been afraid, who had flinched at unexpected sounds, who had checked her phone at 11 p.m. and deleted something and said, "Just spam." And he thought of Caleb, his beautiful, broken, brilliant son, who had been silent for 14 months and had chosen to break that silence not with a word but with a warning. "Don't let them hurt you again." "I want to see the post," Julian said. Renata handed him the phone. He read the comments. "Praying for you, Pastor. God will bring her home. That poor little girl needs her mother. Stay strong, Pastor Gabriel. You're such a good father." Julian scrolled down. One comment buried near the bottom stood out. It was from an account with no profile picture and a generic name, Sarah M. The comment read, "Be careful with this man. Not everything is what it seems." The comment had been posted 12 minutes ago. It already had 6 angry face reactions and a reply from a church member. "How dare you? Pastor Gabriel is a man of God. Delete this." Julian took a screenshot of the comment. Then he handed the phone back to Renata. "Find Sarah M.," he said. "That's either someone who knows the truth or someone Gabriel planted to identify potential allies of Hope's." "Already on it," Renata said. Julian walked out of the dining room. He climbed the stairs. He stood in the hallway outside Caleb's room and listened. Silence. Caleb was napping. Hope was sitting in the chair beside the bed, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the window. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the light, the way it fell across the floor, the way it moved with the passing clouds, the way it changed and shifted and proved that time was passing. Julian understood. When you've been in darkness long enough, you watch light the way a starving person watches food. "Hope," he said from the doorway. She turned. Her face was calmer than it had been that morning, not peaceful but steadier. Being near Caleb did something to her that Julian was only beginning to understand. The boy was medicine, not metaphorically, actually. His presence regulated her breathing, slowed her heartbeat, quieted the constant alarm that had been ringing in her nervous system for 4 years. And she did the same for him. It was mutual, symbiotic. 2 broken people stabilizing each other through proximity alone. "There's something you need to see," Julian said. "And I need you to see it with me, not alone. Because the last time you saw something that scared you, you ran. And I need you to not run." Hope's eyes searched his face. Whatever she found there, honesty, concern, the particular intensity of a man who had made a promise to a 3-year-old and intended to keep it, was enough. "Show me," she said. Julian sat beside her. He showed her the Facebook post on his phone. He watched her face as she read it, watched the blood drain from her cheeks, watched her lips part, watched her hands begin to tremble in the specific fine motor way that indicated not fear but rage. Because Hope's reaction wasn't what Julian expected. She didn't shrink. She didn't cry. She didn't dart her eyes toward the exit. She read the post. She read the comments. She read the prayers and the sympathy and the righteous defense of a man who had beaten her, imprisoned her, stolen her child, and was now using 4,000 people's faith as a weapon to hunt her down. And then she looked at Julian with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. It wasn't fear. It wasn't resignation. It wasn't the exhausted compliance of a woman who had been fighting alone for so long that her arms had given out. It was fury. Clean, clear, incandescent fury. The kind that doesn't scream, the kind that builds. "He posted this," she said. Her voice was low and steady and carried an edge that hadn't been there before. He posted this because he knows I'm here. He's not searching for me. He's warning me. He's telling me that no matter where I go, he controls the story. He controls what people see. He controls." She stopped, breathed, and then she said something that changed the shape of everything. "I'm done running." Julian looked at her. "I've been running for 4 years," Hope said. "I've been invisible for 4 years. I've slept on floors and cleaned toilets and used names that aren't mine and avoided every camera and every screen and every person who might recognize me. And for what? He still found me. He's always going to find me. Because running doesn't work against a man who's built the maze. The only thing that works is burning the maze down." She looked at Caleb, sleeping in the bed beside her. His curls fanned against the pillow. His small chest rose and fell. His blue blanket was clutched to his chin. "Your son broke his silence to protect me," Hope said. "A 3-year-old child used his first words in over a year to tell me I was safe. I will not dishonor that by running again." She turned back to Julian. And for the first time since he'd found her trembling in a ballroom with champagne on her shoes and his son gripping her legs, she looked like the woman she had been before Gabriel Okoro had dismantled her piece by piece. A nurse, a mother, a person with a spine made of something that 4 years of running and hiding and surviving had bent but never broken. "I want to fight," Hope said. "I want my daughter back. I want the world to see him for what he is. And I want Priscilla found alive or dead. Because if he did to her what I think he did, then I'm not his only victim. I'm just the one who's still breathing." Julian felt something shift in his chest. Not the protective fury. That was still there, burning steady. Something new. Something that had been dormant since Elena died, and that he hadn't expected to feel again. Respect, admiration. The particular awe that comes from watching someone who has been systematically destroyed choose to stand up, brush off the rubble, and fight. "Then we fight," Julian said. "Together." Hope held out her hand. Not for a handshake. Not for comfort. For a deal. The way two people seal an agreement when the stakes are everything and the trust is still being built. Julian took it. Her hand was rough, calloused, scarred. His was large, manicured, steady. They held for 3 seconds. It was enough. Downstairs, Whitfield was already drafting the emergency protective order. Renata was tracing Sarah Emma through digital forensics that would have impressed Julian's own cybersecurity team. Marcus was running background checks on every member of Gabriel's church who held a position of institutional power. Judges, doctors, police officers, school administrators. The machine Julian had built over 25 years of business. The resources, the connections, the infrastructure of money and influence and talent was turning its full force toward a single target. And in Trenton, New Jersey, in a 5-bedroom house in a gated community, a 9-year-old girl named Grace sat at her desk, finishing her homework. She was small for her age, with her mother's cheekbones and her mother's watchful eyes. She wore her school uniform pressed and perfect because her father checked every morning, and anything less than perfect meant a lecture about representing the family. When her homework was done, she opened the bottom drawer of her desk, the one her father didn't check, and pulled out a piece of paper. She picked up a crayon, brown for the skin, black for the short hair, and she drew what she drew every night. A woman, holding her hand, smiling. She didn't know the woman's name anymore. Her father had removed every photograph, every document, every trace. But she remembered the feeling. The warmth of being held by someone who didn't check your uniform first. The sound of a voice that told stories about foxes who couldn't find home. Grace folded the drawing carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others. 1,461 drawings. One for every night her mother had been gone. She closed the drawer. She turned off the light. And in the darkness of her room she whispered the same thing she whispered every night. The 2 words she'd taught herself to say silently, in her head, where no one could hear them and no one could take them away. "Come back!" The call came at 6:47 p.m. Julian was in the dining room with Whitfield, reviewing the draft of the emergency protective order, when his personal cell phone rang. Not the office line, not the house phone. His personal cell, the number known only to a handful of people, none of whom would call during a working session without reason. He looked at the screen. "Unknown number. Connecticut area code." Julian answered. "Ashworth." The voice was warm, deep, resonant, the kind of voice that filled rooms without effort, that made you lean in rather than pull back. It carried the cadence of a man who had spent decades speaking to crowds, modulating tone and rhythm the way a musician plays an instrument. Every syllable was intentional. Every pause was placed. Julian knew who it was before the man said his name. "This is Pastor Gabriel Okoro." I'm calling because I believe we have something in common, and I think it would serve us both to discuss it like men of reason." Julian's hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Whitfield looked up, read Julian's expression, and immediately began recording on his own device. A reflex born from 30 years of litigation. Julian gave a small nod. "I'm listening," Julian said. His voice betrayed nothing. "I understand my wife has found shelter in your home," Gabriel said. The word wife was deliberate, not ex-wife, not former wife. Wife, present tense. Ownership wrapped in a syllable. "I want you to know that I harbor no ill will toward you. You're a compassionate man, Mr. Ashworth, father. You saw a woman in distress and you responded with generosity. That speaks well of your character." Julian said nothing. He let the silence work. Gabriel continued, untroubled by the quiet. "Men who controlled conversations for a living were never unsettled by silence. They simply filled it with more of themselves. But I must be honest with you, father to father. Hope is not well. She hasn't been well for many years. What she presents as fear is, in reality, a manifestation of a deeply rooted paranoid delusion, a condition documented by licensed professionals and recognized by the courts. She believes she is being persecuted. She believes the people who love her are her enemies. And she has, tragically, spent the last 4 years fleeing from the very people who want nothing more than to help her heal." The performance was flawless. Julian recognized it the way he recognized excellence in any domain. The precision of the phrasing, the calculated warmth, the strategic placement of father to establish kinship, the medical language deployed not as diagnosis but as weapon. Gabriel wasn't just lying. He was constructing an alternative reality, and he was doing it with the skill of a man who had been constructing alternative realities for decades. "She's very convincing," Gabriel added softly. "That's part of the illness. She believes her own narrative so completely that others believe it too. I've watched good, intelligent people fall under the spell of her version of events. Doctors, social workers, even police officers. She has a way of making you feel that you're the one person who truly understands her, the one person who can save her. It's a survival mechanism. It's not her fault. But it is dangerous, not just to her, but to the people around her." Julian listened to every word. He catalogued every rhetorical technique, and he felt beneath the ice of his composure a rage so clean and controlled it frightened him. "What exactly are you asking me to do, Pastor Okoro?" Julian said. "I'm asking you to let me see her," Gabriel said. "Supervised, if you prefer, with a mental health professional present. I'm not here to take her by force. I'm here because my daughter cries for her mother every night, and I have spent 4 years trying to bring her family back together. All I want is a conversation, a chance to assess her condition, a chance to show her that coming home is safe." The word safe, Hope's word, Caleb's word, the word that had broken open the ballroom and changed everything, landed in Julian's ear like a counterfeit coin, the same shape, the same weight, but hollow at the center. "Let me make sure I understand," Julian said. "You want me to give you access to a woman who has a documented history of fleeing from you, a woman whose psychiatric commitment was based on a forged signature, a woman whose custody case was decided in 11 days by a judge who attends your church. You want me to open my door and let you in?" The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Julian counted. It was the first time Gabriel hadn't filled a pause immediately, and the gap told Julian everything. The pastor hadn't expected his infrastructure to be visible. He had expected Julian to see the surface, the concerned husband, the praying father, the man of God. He had not expected Julian to see the wiring. When Gabriel spoke again, the warmth was still there. But beneath it, like a blade beneath silk, something else had appeared. "Mr. Ashworth," he said, "I can see you've been given a version of events that is deeply colored by Hope's illness. I understand, she's persuasive. But I want to caution you, as one father to another, against inserting yourself into a family matter that you don't fully understand. There are legal structures in place. Court orders, medical records. I have full custody of our daughter. I have every legal right to pursue my wife's return to proper care. And I have the support of a community of 4,000 people who know my family and who know my heart." There it was, the threat, wrapped in velvet, delivered with a pastor's smile but unmistakable. "I have the law, I have the numbers, I have the narrative, and you, with all your money, all your power, are one man standing between me and what's mine." "I appreciate you calling," Julian said. His voice was pleasant, almost conversational, and absolutely lethal in its restraint. "I'll make sure my attorney is aware of your interest in establishing contact. If you'd like to pursue visitation with Hope, I'd suggest you have your lawyer reach out to mine. His name is Daniel Whitfield. I'm sure you can find his number." Another pause, longer this time. The silence of a man recalculating. "I hope you know what you're doing, Mr. Ashworth," Gabriel said. The warmth had thinned. The voice that comforted 4,000 people every Sunday now carried an undertone that those congregants would never recognize. The low, flat frequency of a man who was not accustomed to being denied. "I usually do," Julian said. "People who involve themselves in other families' business often find that the consequences extend further than they anticipated." "Is that a threat, Pastor?" "It's a prayer. I'm praying that God gives you the wisdom to see clearly." "Then we both have something in common," Julian said. "I'm looking for clarity too." He hung up, set the phone on the table, looked at Whitfield. "Did you get all of that?" Julian asked. "Every syllable," Whitfield said. He stopped the recording and labeled the file with the date, time, and participants. "And for the record, that was not the phone call of a concerned husband. That was the phone call of a man establishing a legal position for future litigation. He's going to claim you're harboring his mentally ill wife. He's going to use the custody order as leverage. And he's going to frame every action we take as interference with a family court ruling." "Can he?" Julian asked. "He can try. But the custody order was based on a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, and we can prove it. The forged signature alone is enough to petition for an emergency review. Combined with the compromised judge, the church-funded doctor, and the institutional conflicts of interest, we have grounds to challenge the entire foundation of the custody arrangement." "How long? To overturn the custody?" "Months, best case. Family courts are slow, and Gabriel has home court advantage in Essex County. Literally. Every institution in that jurisdiction has been touched by his influence." "Then we don't fight in Essex County," Julian said. Whitfield raised an eyebrow. "We file in Connecticut," Julian said. "Hope is here. She's been physically present in this state for over 24 hours. We argue that she's established temporary residence. We petition a Connecticut court for an emergency hearing based on new evidence of fraud in the original New Jersey custody proceedings. Different state, different judge, different ecosystem. One that Gabriel hasn't had 20 years to infiltrate." Whitfield stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, the thin, appreciative smile of a lawyer who had just been reminded why he'd been friends with this man for 25 years. "That could work," Whitfield said. "It's aggressive, it's unconventional, and it will make Gabriel Okoro very, very angry." "Good," Julian said. The next morning, Julian found Hope in the kitchen. It was the first time he'd seen her outside of the study, the guest suite, or Caleb's room. She was standing at the counter, wearing clothes that Julian's housekeeper, Mrs. Reeves, had provided. Simple things, a gray sweater and dark pants, nothing fancy, but clean and warm and hers. She was making scrambled eggs. The gesture was so ordinary, so fundamentally domestic, that Julian stopped in the doorway and watched her for a moment before she noticed him. Her movements were efficient but gentle. She cracked eggs with one hand, a nurse's dexterity, muscle memory from years of working with her hands. She stirred with a slow circular motion, patient, unhurried, and she was humming, quietly, almost inaudibly, a melody Julian didn't recognize, but that sounded like it came from somewhere old and warm and safe. Caleb was sitting at the kitchen island, his blue blanket on the stool beside him, watching Hope with the rapt attention of a child witnessing magic. He wasn't just awake, he was alert, present. His big brown eyes tracked Hope's movements with the kind of focused engagement that his therapists had been trying to coax from him for 14 months. "She puts cheese in at the end," Caleb announced when he saw Julian. "Mama used to put cheese in at the end too." Julian felt the sentence move through him, not painfully, not the way Elena's memory usually hit, but warmly, like sunlight through a window that had been boarded up for a year and was finally, cautiously, being opened. "Smart women know about the cheese," Julian said. Hope glanced at him over her shoulder. There was no smile, not yet, but the rigidity that had defined her body since the ballroom had softened. Her shoulders were lower, her jaw was unclenched. She held the spatula the way she'd held Caleb, gently, as if the act of cooking breakfast in a safe kitchen was itself something precious and fragile. "Your housekeeper left groceries," Hope said. "I hope it's okay that I—" "It's more than okay," Julian said. He sat at the island beside Caleb. "It smells like actual food, which is more than I've managed in this kitchen in 14 months. Hope plated the eggs, 3 portions. She set one in front of Caleb, one in front of Julian, and one at the place beside Caleb where she sat. The three of them ate together at the island in a silence that wasn't awkward or heavy or charged. It was just quiet. The quiet of a Tuesday morning, the quiet of a kitchen, the quiet of three people sharing eggs and not needing to explain why it mattered. Caleb ate everything on his plate. Julian stared. The boy had been eating like a bird for over a year. 3 bites of this, 2 bites of that, then pushing his plate away and sliding off his chair. Mrs. Reeves had tried everything. Julian had tried everything. Therapists had offered strategies, meal plans, sensory integration techniques. None of it had worked. And now his son was scraping his plate clean and looking at Hope as if to ask, "Is there more? You want more?" Hope asked. Caleb nodded. She made more. She didn't make a production of it, didn't announce it as a breakthrough or a victory. She just stood up, cracked 2 more eggs, and made the boy more breakfast. And Julian sat at the counter and understood something he hadn't fully grasped until that moment. Hope wasn't just a woman his son had connected with. She was a key that fit a lock Julian hadn't been able to find for 14 months. The lock that Caleb had sealed around himself the night Elena died. Not because Hope was Elena. She wasn't. She was nothing like Elena, different in appearance and background and the specific texture of her presence. But she carried something that Caleb recognized. Something beneath the surface, beneath the words and the gestures and the physical facts. A frequency, a wavelength. The particular electromagnetic signature of a woman who had survived the worst and was still capable of tenderness. Caleb had spent 14 months drowning in a world that had lost that frequency, and Hope was the first person who broadcast it again. Julian's phone buzzed. Atteste from Hinata. Found Sarah M. Real name Sandra Mitchell. She was Priscilla Okoro's college roommate. She's been posting anonymously about Gabriel for 3 years. She's scared but willing to talk. I'm driving to see her now. Julian read the text and felt a door opening, not literally but structurally. Every investigation had a moment when the isolated facts stopped being isolated and began connecting, when the web started to pull tight. This was that moment. A second text from Renata sent 30 seconds later. Also, Pinecrest Resort guest records obtained. Gabriel Okoro stayed at Pinecrest from August 3/10 2 years ago. Elena Ashworth drowned at Pinecrest on August 7. They were at the same resort at the same time. Julian. They overlapped. Julian set the phone face down on the counter. He looked at Hope, who was washing the pan. He looked at Caleb, who was drawing on a napkin, not just scribbling but drawing. A woman, short hair, a scar above her eye, holding a little boy's hand. The boy was drawing Hope, the same way Grace drew her mother every night in a drawer her father didn't check. Julian closed his eyes for a moment. He let the connections form, let the pattern complete itself. Let the weight of what was emerging settle onto his shoulders with a permanence he knew he'd be carrying for a very long time. Gabriel Okoro had been at Pinecrest the week Elena drowned. Dr. Richard Ames, the man who signed Elena's death certificate, sat on the board of Gabriel's church-funded psychiatric facility. Gabriel's first wife had disappeared 6 years ago. His second wife had been beaten, imprisoned, and hunted for 4. And now, through the random, inexplicable, almost miraculous act of a 3-year-old boy running across a ballroom to a stranger, all of these threads had converged in Julian's kitchen on a Tuesday morning. Julian opened his eyes. He picked up his phone and called Marcus. "I need you to pull everything we have on Elena's trip to Maine," he said. "Not the police file, our file. The private investigation we commissioned after she died. The one that went nowhere. I want every guest list, every staff roster, every security camera log from Pinecrest for the week of August 3rd through the 10th. And I want to know if Dr. Richard Ames was on duty at Hancock County Medical Examiner's office that week, or if he was called in specifically for Elena's case." "Understood," Marcus said. "How deep?" "All the way down," Julian said. "And Marcus, Caleb saw Gabriel outside the gate last night. He described him before we showed him the footage. My son recognized a man he's never met, which means either Caleb saw him before, somewhere, somehow, or—" Julian stopped. The thought that had been forming in the back of his mind for the last 12 hours, the thought he'd been avoiding because it was too enormous, too impossible, too terrifying, finally broke through. "Or Gabriel has been watching this house for longer than 6 months, Julian said. "And Caleb has seen him before, standing on the street, looking up at the windows, smiling." Marcus was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll pull the full archive," he said. "Every exterior camera, going back 2 years. Julian hung up. He looked at his son. Caleb was still drawing, adding details to the picture of Hope. A plate of eggs, a kitchen, a window with light coming through it, "A morning. Caleb," Julian said carefully. "The man you saw last night. The one who was smiling outside the gate. Have you seen him before?" Caleb didn't look up from his drawing, but his hand stopped moving. The crayon hovered above the napkin, and Julian could see the boy's small body tense, not with fear exactly, but with the particular stillness of a child who has been carrying a secret and feels it pressing against the walls. "Yes," Caleb said quietly. Julian's heart stopped, restarted, stopped again. "When, buddy?" Caleb put the crayon down. He looked at his father with those ancient, serious eyes, Elena's shape, Julian's intensity, and said, with the calm, devastating precision that had characterized every word he'd spoken since breaking his 14-month silence, "He was at the beach, the day Mummy went in the water. He was standing on the rocks, watching." The kitchen went silent. Hope, still at the sink, turned slowly. Her wet hands dripped onto the floor. Her face had gone the color of ash. Julian couldn't breathe. The room tilted. The morning light that had felt warm and ordinary seconds ago now felt harsh, forensic, the light of an operating theater. "He was watching Mummy," Caleb said. His voice was small but steady. The voice of a child who had been holding this inside for 14 months and had finally found the two people he trusted enough to give it to. "She saw him. She was scared. She looked at me and she said, 'Stay here, baby. Don't move.' And then she walked toward the water. And he watched. And she didn't come back." Julian reached for his son. He pulled Caleb off the stool and into his arms and held him so tightly that the boy made a small sound of surprise. But he didn't resist. He buried his face in Julian's chest, the same way he'd buried his face in Hope's uniform in the ballroom, and he cried. Not the screaming, desperate cry of the gala, a quiet, exhausted, relieved cry. The cry of someone who has been carrying something far too heavy for far too long and has finally been allowed to set it down. Hope stood at the sink, motionless. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Her eyes were fixed on Julian and Caleb, and in them was something beyond shock, beyond fear, beyond the already devastating revelations of the past 36 hours. It was recognition, because Hope understood, with the searing clarity of a woman who had lived inside Gabriel Okoro's architecture for 8 years, exactly what Caleb had just described. A woman, scared, walking toward water. A man watching, not chasing, not threatening, just watching. The way Gabriel always operated, never with his hands, always with his presence. Never with force, always with the implication of force. Standing on rocks, smiling, letting the fear do the work for him. Elena hadn't drowned by accident. Elena had been driven into the water by a man who had perfected the art of making women disappear without ever touching them. And a 3-year-old boy, who had been too young to understand what he saw and too traumatized to speak of it, had just unlocked the truth that 14 months of grief, investigation, and silence had buried. Hope crossed the kitchen. She knelt beside Julian and Caleb. She placed her hand on the boy's back. Steady, warm, the hand of a woman who knew this particular darkness intimately, and she looked at Julian. "Gabriel doesn't get caught because he doesn't leave marks," she said. Her voice was low and fierce and trembling with the force of a truth she'd been trying to make the world hear for 4 years. "He doesn't push. He doesn't hit in public. He builds a cage around you, a cage made of fear and isolation and systems, and then he opens the door and lets you destroy yourself. That's what he did to me. That's what he did to Priscilla. And that's what he did to your wife." Julian held his son. He looked at the woman kneeling beside him, and he felt the last piece of the pattern fall into place with a sound that wasn't audible but was felt. In the bones, in the blood, in the permanent, irreversible shift that happens when you finally see the full shape of the thing you've been fighting in the dark. "He's not getting away with this," Julian said. His voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It came out the way bedrock sounds when you strike it. Solid, unyielding, and absolutely certain. Not with Elena, not with Priscilla, not with you, not with Grace, not with anyone, ever again. Caleb lifted his head from Julian's chest. His small face was wet, his curls matted, his brown eyes swollen, but beneath the tears, beneath the grief, beneath the 14 months of silence that had finally, irreversibly shattered, there was something new. Trust. Not the blind trust of a toddler who doesn't know better. The earned trust of a child who had tested the world, found it wanting, and had finally, through a maid in a ballroom and a father who knelt on champagne-soaked marble, found 2 people worth believing in. "Promise," Caleb whispered. Julian looked at his son. He looked at Hope. He thought of Grace, drawing pictures in a hidden drawer. He thought of Priscilla, who might be buried in a place no one had thought to look. He thought of Elena, walking into dark water while a man in a clerical collar watched from the rocks. "Promise," Julian said. And this time, unlike all the other promises he'd made in his life, the promises to boards and investors and partners and the hollow promise he'd made to Elena that everything would be fine, this one had teeth. Sandra Mitchell lived in a narrow brick townhouse on a tree-lined street in Hoboken, New Jersey, the kind of street where neighbors knew each other's names and kept their sidewalks clean and didn't ask too many questions about the woman on the third floor who never opened her blinds. Renata Souza arrived at 11 a.m., parked her rental car 2 blocks away out of habit, and walked to the front door carrying nothing but her phone and 20 years of experience reading people who were afraid. Sandra answered on the second knock. She was 41, heavyset, with deep brown skin and braids pulled back in a thick bun. She wore glasses with tortoiseshell frames and a Georgetown sweatshirt that had been washed so many times the letters were cracking. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were not. They moved past Renata immediately, scanning the street behind her, checking for cars that didn't belong, faces that shouldn't be there. The eyes of a woman who had been looking over her shoulder for years. "You're the investigator," Sandra said. Not a question. "Renata Souza." We spoke on the phone. Sandra studied her for 5 full seconds. Whatever she was looking for, sincerity, competence, the absence of threat, she apparently found it, because she stepped aside and let Renata in. The apartment was small and meticulously organized, books alphabetized on shelves, dishes drying in perfect rows on the rack, a single framed photograph on the mantelpiece. Renata saw the photograph immediately and felt her pulse shift. It showed 2 young women in graduation gowns, Georgetown based on the blue and gray, arms around each other laughing. One was Sandra, 20 years younger, lighter in the face, unburdened. The other was Priscilla Okoro, the same gap-toothed smile from the missing person flyer, the same kind eyes, but alive and bright and full of the particular invincibility that comes from being 21 and believing the world is a place that keeps its promises. Sandra saw Renata looking at the photograph. "That's the last time she looked like that," Sandra said. She sat on the couch and folded her hands in her lap, tightly, as if holding herself together. Free. She looked free. 2 years later she met Gabriel. And the light went out. Renata sat across from her. She didn't take out a notebook. She didn't record. She let Sandra lead, the way you let a skittish horse approach the gate on its own terms. "I've been posting about him for 3 years, Sandra said. "Anonymous accounts, different platforms. Every time I post, the account gets reported within hours. Mass reports, coordinated from dozens of accounts. Church members. They don't even know what they're reporting. Gabriel tells them it's spiritual warfare, that enemies of the church are spreading lies online. They report on command. The accounts get shut down. I make new ones. They get shut down too. It's a cycle. But you keep posting," Renata said, "because Priscilla can't." The sentence sat between them like a stone. Sandra drew a breath. It shook. Priscilla and Gabriel married 12 years ago. She was 28. He was 36. He was already building the church. It was small then, maybe 300 members, but growing fast. Priscilla was his showcase. Beautiful, educated, graceful. The perfect pastor's wife. She sang in the choir. She organized the women's ministry. She hosted dinners for new members. She was everything he needed her to be. Sandra's jaw tightened. And that was the problem. She was what he needed her to be, not what she was. There's a difference. Gabriel didn't want a wife. He wanted a performance. And Priscilla performed beautifully, for a while. But she was smart, too smart. She started noticing things. Money that didn't add up. Tithes that went into accounts she couldn't access. A building fund that never built anything. She asked questions. Quiet questions at first. Then louder ones. And he responded, Renata said. The way he always responds. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He rearranged reality. Suddenly Priscilla was struggling with her faith. Suddenly she was going through a difficult season. He told the congregation she was dealing with depression, which she wasn't, not then. And he asked them to hold her in prayer and give her space. Do you understand what that means? He isolated her using their compassion. The same people who might have helped her started avoiding her, giving her space, treating her like she was fragile. She lost her support network without anyone realizing they were taking it away. Renata understood. She had seen it in domestic violence cases during her FBI career. The methodical isolation, the weaponization of community goodwill, the way abusers turned empathy into a tool of control. Gabriel hadn't invented the technique, but he had refined it to an art form. When did the physical abuse start? Renata asked. Year 3, maybe earlier. Priscilla didn't tell me everything right away. She was ashamed. She thought it was her fault. The first time she showed me a bruise, she said she'd walked into a cabinet door. I didn't push. I should have pushed. Sandra's voice cracked. She removed her glasses and pressed her fingers against her eyes. By year 4, she was calling me from the bathroom at 2 in the morning, whispering so he wouldn't hear. She told me he'd thrown her against the bedroom wall because she'd questioned a financial transaction at a church board meeting. In front of the elders, she'd embarrassed him. Sandra put her glasses back on. Her eyes were wet, but her voice steadied. Year 5, she started building a case. I helped her. We collected everything: photographs of bruises, screenshots of bank statements, recordings she made on a phone I bought her and hid in a tampon box because he checked everything else. We found a lawyer, a woman in Newark named Patricia Dunn, who specialized in domestic violence cases involving high-profile abusers. Patricia was smart, careful, thorough. She told Priscilla that the case was strong, but that timing was everything. They needed to file when Gabriel was most vulnerable, during tax season, when the church's financial irregularities would be hardest to hide. What happened? Renata asked. Sandra was quiet for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. A car passed on the street outside. Somewhere in the building, a child laughed. March 14, 2019, Sandra said. I know the date because it's tattooed on the inside of my life. Priscilla called me at 8 p.m. She said she was leaving that night. She said she'd packed a bag and hidden it in the trunk of her car. She said Patricia Dunn had prepared an emergency filing that would be submitted to the court the next morning. A restraining order, a divorce petition, and a motion to freeze the church's financial accounts pending investigation. Everything was ready. She was going to drive to my apartment and stay the night, and in the morning the filings would go through, and it would be over. Sandra's hands were trembling now. She pressed them flat against her knees. She never arrived. The room went very still. I waited until midnight. Then I called her phone. No answer. I called again at 1, 2, 3. By 4 in the morning, I was driving to Trenton. I went to the house. The lights were off. Her car was in the driveway. The bag she'd packed was still in the trunk. I checked. I knocked on the door. Gabriel answered. Sandra's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. He was calm. He was wearing a bathrobe. He smelled like soap, like he'd just showered. He told me Priscilla had left him. He said she'd been having an affair and had run off with a man from her gym. He said he'd come home from a church meeting and found a note. He held the note up for me to see, handwritten on Priscilla's stationery, in handwriting that looked like hers but wasn't. I know Priscilla's handwriting the way I know my own face. The letters were too careful, too upright, like someone had studied her writing and copied it. Like the signature on Hope's admission form, Renata said quietly. Sandra looked at her sharply. You know about Hope? I know about Hope. Sandra closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were hard. Not with anger, with the specific crystallized resolve of a woman who had been waiting 6 years for someone to believe her. Then you know he does this. He makes women disappear. Not with violence that would be too obvious, too traceable. He makes them disappear through systems, through paperwork, through other people's signatures and other people's authority. He built a machine, and the machine swallows women whole, and the world looks at the machine and sees a church. Renata leaned forward. Sandra, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe Priscilla's dead? Sandra didn't hesitate. Yes. Do you have evidence? I have absence of evidence, which after 6 years is its own kind of proof. Priscilla had a savings account I helped her open, secret, in my name, funded with small cash deposits over 2 years. That account has not been touched since March 14, 2019. Not a single withdrawal. Priscilla had a burner phone that I paid for. That phone has been off since March 14, 2019. Priscilla had a storage unit in Newark where she kept copies of every document Patricia Dunn had prepared. The financial records, the photographs, the recordings. That storage unit has been paid through automatic deduction from the savings account. The documents should still be there. Renata felt the shift, the specific electrical sensation that happened in an investigation when a wall that had seemed impenetrable suddenly revealed a door. You have the key to that storage unit? Renata asked. I have the key. I have the account information. And I have every email and text message Priscilla sent me for the last 2 years of her life. I kept them, all of them, on a hard drive that has never been connected to the internet. Sandra stood. She walked to the bookshelf, removed a copy of Toni Morrison's Beloved, and from behind it produced a small external hard drive, silver, no larger than a deck of cards. "I'd been waiting 6 years for someone to come for this," Sandra said. She held it out to Renata with both hands, the way you hold something sacred. "I posted online. I contacted journalists. I called the police 4 times. I wrote to 3 different district attorneys. Nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to go after a pastor with 4,000 congregants and political connections and a smile that makes the whole world feel safe." Renata took the hard drive. It weighed almost nothing. "It might contain everything. You're not nobody," Sandra said. "The man you work for, Ashworth, he has the resources and the reach to do what I couldn't do alone. Priscilla deserved better than disappearing into silence. Hope deserves better than running for the rest of her life. And that little girl, Grace, she deserves to know her mother isn't crazy. She deserves to know the truth." Renata placed the hard drive in her jacket pocket. She would handle it with the chain of custody precision her FBI training demanded, cataloged, duplicated, stored in a secure location with access logs. Whatever was on that drive, it would be admissible. "One more thing," Renata said. "The lawyer, Patricia Dunn, the one who was preparing Priscilla's filing. What happened to her?" Sandra's face changed. A shadow moved across it, the particular shadow of a fear that has lived in the body so long it has become part of the architecture. "Patricia Dunn closed her practice 3 weeks after Priscilla disappeared," Sandra said. "She moved out of state, changed her phone number. I tried to reach her for 2 years. Finally, I got a letter. No return address. 3 sentences, I can't help you. I was warned, I'm sorry." "Warned by whom?" She didn't say. "But who warns lawyers? Other lawyers, police, people with the power to end a career or worse." Sandra paused. "Gabriel doesn't just build systems to trap women. He builds systems to trap everyone. The doctors who serve him, the judges who rule for him, the lawyers who might have fought against him. Everyone who enters his orbit either serves him or is neutralized. That's what makes him different from every other abuser I've ever read about. He doesn't just control his household, he controls the ecosystem." Renata stood. She shook Sandra's hand, firmly, with the grip of a woman who understood the courage it took to hold a hard drive behind a bookshelf for 6 years and wait for someone to knock. "We'll be in touch," Renata said. "Soon." "Be careful," Sandra said. "He knows you're coming. A man like Gabriel, he always knows." Renata drove straight from Hoboken to Newark. The storage unit was in a facility on the industrial edge of the city, the kind of place where people kept things they didn't want found. She used the key Sandra had provided. The unit was small, 5 by 5, and inside, stacked neatly on metal shelving, were 6 bankers' boxes. Renata opened the first box. Inside were folders, meticulously organized, labeled in handwriting that matched the samples she'd seen of Priscilla's real penmanship. Financial records for New Life Covenant Church. Bank statements showing transfers from the church's general fund to Covenant Health Holdings. Tax filings with discrepancies circled in red. A ledger, handwritten, detailed, tracking donations that entered the church but never appeared in official filings. Money that went somewhere. A lot of money. The second box contained photographs, not of bruises, though there were those too, dated and annotated with clinical precision. The photographs that stopped Renata's breath were different, surveillance photographs, taken from a distance with a long lens. Photographs of Gabriel meeting with men Renata didn't recognize in locations that weren't church property. Parking lots, hotel lobbies, a private airfield, and in 3 of the photographs, standing beside Gabriel with the ease of a man among friends, was Dr. Richard Ames. Gabriel and Ames, together, in photographs dated 8 years ago, long before Elena drowned, long before Hope was committed to Greenfield. The relationship wasn't institutional, it was personal, and it was old. The third box contained recordings. Renata didn't listen to them in the storage unit. That would come later, in a controlled environment, with proper equipment and witnesses. But the labels on the cassettes and USB drives were enough to send electricity through her spine. Dates, times, descriptions in Priscilla's handwriting. G on phone with Ames Re. Facility expansion. G discussing handling the accountant who asked questions. G after argument. His exact words Re. What happens to women who try to leave? Priscilla Okoro had been building more than a divorce case. She had been building a criminal case. She had been documenting not just abuse but fraud, corruption, and conspiracy. She had been assembling the kind of evidence that could have brought down not just a marriage, but an entire institutional network. And then she had disappeared. Renata sealed the boxes. She called a courier she trusted, a former colleague who ran a bonded document transport service, and arranged for the boxes to be delivered to Whitfield's office under armed escort. Then she sat in her rental car in the storage facility parking lot and called Julian. "I found Priscilla's files," she said. 6 boxes, financial records, photographs, recordings. "Julian, there are photographs of Gabriel with Ames, together, from 8 years ago. This isn't a new connection. They've known each other for nearly a decade." Julian was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the density of a man who has just watched the final piece of a puzzle lock into place. "Elena died 14 months ago," he said. "Gabriel was at Pinecrest when she drowned. Ames signed the death certificate, and they've been connected for 8 years. He paused. "This wasn't an accident, Renata, and it wasn't opportunistic. Whatever happened to Elena was part of something, a relationship, a network, a system." "I agree," Renata said. "And I think Priscilla figured it out, or was close to figuring it out, before she disappeared. She was documenting everything. Financial fraud, institutional corruption, the connection between Gabriel and Ames. She was going to blow the whole thing open, and Gabriel stopped her," Julian said. "Gabriel stopped her." The line was quiet for 3 seconds. Julian counting, Renata waiting. "Bring the files to the house," Julian said. "Tonight. We'll go through everything with Whitfield. And Renata, call the retired detective from Trenton, the one who worked Priscilla's missing person case, the one whose supervisor shut it down." "What do I tell him?" "Tell him we found what he was looking for 6 years ago. Tell him we're reopening the case. And tell him this time nobody is shutting it down." Renata hung up. She started the car. And as she pulled out of the parking lot, she checked her rearview mirror, a habit that had kept her alive through 20 years in the FBI, and that had never, not once, proven unnecessary. A black sedan was parked across the street. Tinted windows, engine idling, plate she recognized. New Life Covenant Church. Renata noted the position. She noted the time. She drove 3 blocks, made 4 turns, and confirmed the sedan was following. Then she pulled into a gas station, got out of her car, walked directly toward the sedan, and stood 2 feet from the driver's side window. The window rolled down. A man in his 30s, heavyset, wearing a New Life Covenant Church polo shirt, stared at her with the expression of someone who had expected to be invisible and was now discovering, with considerable discomfort, that he was not. "Tell Pastor Okoro," Renata said, her voice pleasant and her eyes anything but, "that the next time he sends someone to follow me, I'll have them arrested for stalking, and I'll make sure every news outlet in the tri-state area knows that a church is using its volunteers for surveillance operations. And tell him something else." She leaned closer. The man leaned back. "Tell him we found the boxes." She walked back to her car, got in, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, she saw the man fumbling with his phone, already making the call. Good. Let him call. Let Gabriel know. Let the man who had spent 6 years thinking Priscilla's evidence was buried learn that it had just been unearthed. And at the Ashworth estate, at that same moment, something happened that no one, not Julian, not Renata, not Whitfield, not even Hope, had anticipated. Caleb was in the study with Hope, drawing pictures while she sat beside him. Julian was on the phone with Marcus in the next room. The house was quiet. The security detail was in position. The afternoon sun came through the windows at a low angle, casting long, warm stripes across the floor. The house phone rang. Mrs. Reeves answered it in the kitchen. 30 seconds later, she appeared in the study doorway, her face pale, her hands gripping the cordless phone like it might break. "Ms. Enderu," she said, using the name Julian had instructed the staff to use. "There's a call for you." Hope went rigid. Every muscle in her body locked. Her eyes snapped to the phone in Mrs. Reeves's hand with the wired electric focus of a woman whose survival had depended on reading threats faster than they could reach her. "Who is it?" Hope whispered. Mrs. Reeves swallowed. "She says her name is Grace. She says she's your daughter." The sound Hope made was not a cry. It was not a gasp. It was something that came from a place beneath language, beneath thought, beneath the 4 years of running and hiding and grieving that had calcified around her heart like armor. It was the sound of that armor cracking, not breaking, cracking. The first fracture in a shell that had been built to withstand everything except the one thing it was never designed to protect against, her daughter's voice. Hope's hand trembled so violently as she reached for the phone that Caleb, who had been drawing silently beside her, put down his crayon, took her other hand in both of his small ones, and held it steady. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He simply held on the way she had held him in the ballroom, and gave her the only thing he had to give: presence, the knowledge that she was not alone. Hope pressed the phone to her ear. "Grace?" she breathed. The word came out broken, wet, barely shaped, the sound of a mother saying her daughter's name for the first time in 4 years. And on the other end of the line, a small voice, 9 years old, shaking, fierce, whispering so no one else could hear, said the words that Hope had been dreaming of every night since the night she escaped through an unlocked door and left behind everything she loved. "Mama!" "I know you didn't leave me. I found the pictures. I found all of them. Please come get me. He's scaring me. Please, Mama, please come." Hope pressed the phone against her chest. She folded forward. Caleb held her hand. And in the study of a billionaire's house in Connecticut, a woman who had been told she was nothing, by a man, by a system, by a world that chose his story over hers, heard the only voice that had ever mattered tell her the only truth that had ever been true. "You are my mother. I need you. Come." Hope held the phone against her chest for a long time after Grace's voice went silent. The line hadn't disconnected. The girl had simply stopped speaking, her breath still audible in small, ragged waves, the breathing of a child who was hiding somewhere in her own house and trying not to be heard. Hope could hear it all, the whispered urgency, the swallowed fear, the particular quality of silence that surrounds a child who has learned to make herself small. Hope knew that silence. She had lived inside it for 8 years. "Grace," Hope finally managed. Her voice was wrecked, shattered and rebuilt in the space of a single word, the way a bone resets after a break. "Baby, listen to me. I need you to tell me where you are right now." "Exactly where?" "In the bathroom," Grace whispered. "The one by the laundry room. He doesn't check this one. He forgot it has a lock." Hope closed her eyes. She could see it. The small half-bathroom off the back hallway of the house in Trenton, the one with the cracked tile floor and the window that was painted shut. She had hidden in that bathroom herself, years ago, pressing her back against the door, while Gabriel's footsteps moved through the house like a metronome, steady, patient, never hurrying. Because a man who controls every door doesn't need to hurry. "How did you call me?" Hope asked. "How did you get this number?" "Daddy's phone," Grace said. The word daddy came out flat, emptied of warmth. A word she used because she had no alternative, not because it carried affection. He left it on the kitchen counter when Deacon Tills came to the house. They went into the study and closed the door. I looked at his phone. He had this number in his call history. I knew it wasn't a number I recognized, so I copied it and used the house phone, Julian's number. Gabriel had called Julian yesterday. And Grace, 9 years old, hiding in a bathroom, surviving inside the same machine her mother had barely escaped, had memorized the number and called it back. Hope pressed her fist against her mouth. The intelligence, the resourcefulness, the desperate, calculated courage of a child who had figured out, on her own, that the man raising her was not safe, and had found a way to reach through the walls he'd built and find her mother on the other end of a phone line. "Grace, baby, are you hurt?" He doesn't hit me." Grace's voice was careful, precise, the voice of a child choosing her words with the same deliberation her mother had used in the ballroom. "He doesn't have to. He watches. He's always watching. He checks my room. He reads my journal. I started writing a fake journal so he'd have something to read. The real one is in a hole I cut in my mattress." Hope's hand was shaking so badly the phone rattled against her ear. Caleb was still holding her other hand, his small fingers wrapped around hers, his brown eyes fixed on her face with a gravity that belonged to someone much older. "I found the pictures," Grace continued. "My drawings. I keep them in my bottom drawer. He found them 2 weeks ago." He didn't yell. He sat me down and he said, "Grace, your mother is very sick. These drawings are a sign that her illness is affecting you. We need to talk to someone about this. He wants me to see a doctor, the same doctor, the one at the hospital where he sent you, Dr. Thomas Weir, Greenfield Behavioral Health, the church-funded psychiatrist who had signed a fraudulent diagnosis that destroyed Hope's life. Gabriel was going to do it again, not to his wife this time, to his daughter." "Grace," Hope said, and her voice had changed. The trembling was gone. Something had hardened in her, not into coldness, but into the specific diamond-hard clarity of a mother whose child is in danger. "Listen to me very carefully. Do not see the doctor. Do you understand me? Whatever your father says, whatever reason he gives, do not go to that appointment." "I know, Mama. I know what he did to you. I've been reading things online at the school library. I searched his name. I found the posts, the ones that keep getting taken down. I know about the lady who writes them. Sarah M. I know it's real." Hope's breath stopped. "Sanda." Grace had found Sandra's posts, the anonymous warnings that were reported and deleted within hours. The 9-year-old had been conducting her own investigation, piecing together the truth about her father from fragments of internet posts that the church's digital army kept trying to erase. "I'm coming for you," Hope said. The words came out with a force that surprised even her, not loud, not dramatic, but absolute. The voice of a woman who had spent 4 years in exile and had just received the only summons that mattered. "I don't know how yet, but I am coming. And when I do, we are never going to be separated again. Do you believe me?" The pause that followed was the longest 3 seconds of Hope's life. "Yes," Grace whispered, "I believe you. I need you to hang up now," Hope said. "Put the phone back exactly where you found it. Erase this number from the house phone's call history if you can, and keep acting normal. Can you do that?" "I've been acting normal for 4 years, Mama. I'm good at it." The line went dead. Hope lowered the phone slowly, placed it on the table beside her, and sat perfectly still. Caleb hadn't let go of her hand. He was watching her the way he'd watched her in the ballroom, not with a child's confusion, but with a child's understanding, the deep, wordless comprehension that doesn't need explanation because it operates on a frequency adults have forgotten how to hear. "Your girl is brave," Caleb said quietly. Hope looked at him. This boy, this 3-year-old who had been silent for 14 months, whose first words had been a warning to protect a stranger, who had held her hand through a phone call that had broken her open and put her back together in the space of 5 minutes, looked at her with Elena's eyes and Julian's intensity, and said the exact thing she needed to hear. "She is," Hope whispered. "She's the bravest person I know." Julian appeared in the doorway. He'd been standing there, Hope didn't know for how long. His face told her he'd heard enough. The controlled stillness, the set of his jaw, the way his large hands were curled at his sides, not in fists, but in readiness. "We need to move faster," Julian said. By that evening, the Ashworth estate had transformed from a home into a command center. The dining room table was buried under Whitfield's legal filings, Priscilla's storage boxes, delivered by armored courier at 4 p.m., Renata's investigative reports, and Marcus's security assessments. The 4 of them, Julian, Whitfield, Renata, and Marcus, sat around the table while Hope put Caleb to bed upstairs, and they mapped the next 72 hours with the precision of a military operation. "Here's where we stand," Whitfield said, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. "I've drafted 3 filings. First, emergency protective order for Hope against Gabriel Okoro, filed in Connecticut Superior Court, based on documented history of domestic violence, fraudulent psychiatric commitment, and ongoing stalking. Supporting evidence includes the forged admission signature, the compromised doctor, the compromised judge, and the security footage of Gabriel at the Ashworth estate." He laid the document on the table. Second, emergency petition to modify custody of Grace Inderu Okoro, also filed in Connecticut on jurisdictional grounds of Hope's temporary residence. "We're arguing that the original New Jersey custody order was obtained through fraud, specifically a psychiatric evaluation conducted by a doctor financially dependent on the respondent, presented to a judge with undisclosed personal ties to the respondent's church. We're requesting an immediate hearing and temporary emergency custody transfer to Hope pending full review." He laid the second document beside the first. "Third, and this is the one that changes everything." Whitfield paused. He looked at Julian with the expression of a lawyer about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. "A formal complaint to the FBI requesting a federal investigation into Gabriel Okoro and associated individuals, including Dr. Richard Ames, for wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and potential homicide in connection with the disappearance of Priscilla Okoro and the death of Elena Ashworth." The room was silent. "Federal," Julian said. "Federal," Whitfield confirmed. "Local law enforcement in Trenton is compromised. We know that from Priscilla's case. The New Jersey judiciary has conflicts of interest. The only way to bypass Gabriel's local network is to go above it. FBI, federal prosecutors, a jurisdiction he hasn't had 20 years to infiltrate." "Priscilla's recordings," Renata said. "I've listened to 6 of them so far. 3 are conversations between Gabriel and Dr. Ames discussing financial arrangements for Greenfield. 2 document Gabriel discussing how to manage church members who ask too many questions about finances. And 1, recorded 3 weeks before Priscilla disappeared, captures Gabriel saying, and I quote directly, "Women who try to leave don't understand that leaving isn't an option. I don't lose. I've never lost. And anyone who thinks they can build a case against me doesn't understand that I own the courtroom before they walk into it." Whitfield wrote something on his legal pad, and circled it twice. That recording, combined with the financial documents, the photographs of Gabriel with Ames, and the forged psychiatric records, gives us more than enough for a federal complaint, Whitfield said. But I want to be clear about what happens next. The moment we file, we declare war, not a legal skirmish. War. Gabriel will respond with everything he has, and what he has is significant. 4,000 congregants who will flood social media with his version of events. Political connections who will apply pressure behind closed doors. Lawyers who will challenge every filing, every piece of evidence, every witness. And the narrative advantage of being a beloved man of God versus a billionaire and a woman the world has been told is mentally ill. He's already controlling the narrative, Julian said. His Facebook post has 1,200 shares now. The comments are running 95% in his favor. If we wait, the narrative calcifies. We have to move before his version becomes the only version. Agreed, Whitfield said. Which is why I'm recommending we file all 3 documents simultaneously tomorrow morning and coordinate with a media strategy. Media? Hope's voice came from the doorway. She had come downstairs silently, the habit of a woman who had learned to move without sound. She stood at the edge of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, wearing the gray sweater Mrs. Reeves had given her. Her eyes were red, her face was calm, the face of a woman who had made her decision and was not going to unmake it. I heard you, she said. Media strategy. You want me to go public. Whitfield looked at Julian. Julian looked at Hope. Not want, Julian said carefully. But the option is on the table. Gabriel's power comes from narrative control. He tells the story first, and he tells it loudest, and he tells it through 4,000 voices that echo whatever he says. The only way to break that is to tell a different story, a true story, and the only person who can tell it is you. Hope was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the table, at the legal filings, the evidence boxes, the photographs, the recordings, the accumulated weight of years of suffering distilled into documents and files, and the cold machinery of justice. If I go public, she said, Gabriel will know exactly where I am. He'll know I'm fighting, and he'll escalate. He'll escalate regardless, Renata said. The complaint to the FBI will become public record. He'll know. The question is whether you control the moment or he does. Hope looked at Julian. And Grace? If I go public, what happens to her? The emergency custody petition includes a request for temporary removal of Grace from Gabriel's home pending investigation, Whitfield said. If the Connecticut court grants the emergency order, a guardian ad litem will be appointed and Grace will be placed in protective care, ideally with you given the circumstances. Ideally, Hope repeated. The word sat in the air like a stone balanced on a ledge. In Hope's world, ideally had never once translated into reality. Every system that should have protected her had failed. Every institution that should have believed her had sided with the man who built it. Ideally was a word for people whose lives operated on trust. Hope's life operated on evidence. I'll do it, she said. I'll go public, but not for me, for Grace, and for Priscilla. And for... She looked at Julian. Her dark eyes held his with a steadiness that hadn't been there 2 days ago. And for Elena. Because if what your son said is true, if Gabriel was there the day she died, then I'm not the only woman he's destroyed. I'm just the one who's still standing. Julian nodded. The motion was small, but it carried the full weight of everything that had passed between them since a 3-year-old boy had run across a ballroom and changed the course of both their lives. At 11 p.m., Julian walked the perimeter of the estate with Marcus. The night was cold, clear, starless in the way that Connecticut winter nights are starless, the sky a flat, dark ceiling pressing down on the earth. Camera archives, Julian said. Did you find anything? Marcus nodded. He handed Julian his tablet. On the screen was a compilation of security footage, time-stamped clips from the estate's exterior cameras, spanning 18 months. The black sedan, New Life Covenant church plates, first appears in the camera archive 11 months ago, Marcus said. 3 months after Elena's death, it drives past the estate slowly, doesn't stop. Appears again 2 weeks later. Same behavior. The third appearance 6 months ago, it parks across the street for 47 minutes. Julian watched the footage. The sedan moving slowly, returning, parking, watching. 11 months of surveillance. Gabriel hadn't found Hope at the gala by accident or by Vanessa's phone call alone. He had been watching Julian's house for nearly a year. Why? Julian said, not rhetorically. The question was genuine and it gnawed at him. Hope wasn't here until 2 days ago. She had no connection to this house. Why was Gabriel watching me? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe he wasn't watching you. Maybe he was watching for someone else." Julian looked at him. "Elena's body was never found," Marcus said. "And we now know that Gabriel was at Pinecrest when she drowned. We know he's connected to the doctor who signed her death certificate. But what if—" Marcus paused, choosing his words with the deliberate care of a man who understood the magnitude of what he was about to suggest. What if he wasn't sure she was dead either? The thought hit Julian with the force of a physical impact. He stopped walking. The cold air pressed against his face. The security lights cast sharp white pools on the driveway. "You think he was watching my house," Julian said slowly, "to see if Elena came back. I think it's possible. A body that's never recovered is a loose end. And from everything we've learned about Gabriel Okoro, he doesn't tolerate loose ends." Julian stared into the darkness beyond the gates. The street was empty. The sedan was gone. But the implication of Marcus's words filled the space like a presence, invisible, enormous, and carrying a question that Julian had buried 14 months ago and that was now clawing its way back to the surface with a force he could no longer suppress. What if Elena wasn't dead? The thought was irrational. He knew it was irrational. The Coast Guard had searched for 3 days. The medical examiner, Ames, compromised Ames, Gabriel's Ames, had declared her dead based on the conditions, the water temperature, the elapsed time. Julian had accepted the death certificate. He had planned a memorial service with no casket. He had tried to explain to a 2-year-old that Mummy was gone, but no body had ever been found, no remains, no clothing, no trace. The ocean had swallowed Elena Ashworth completely, and Julian had accepted that because the alternative, that she was alive and hadn't come home, was too agonizing to contemplate. Now, standing in the cold outside his own gates, with the knowledge of what Gabriel Okoro was capable of, the alternative looked different. Not agonizing, possible. If Gabriel could make Priscilla disappear by writing a fake goodbye note and smiling at the police. If he could make hope disappear by forging a psychiatric diagnosis and buying a judge. If he could build systems that swallowed women whole and left no trace, then could he make Elena disappear too? Not by killing her, but by something else. Something more characteristic of his method. The method Hope had described in the kitchen. The method that didn't leave marks, that built cages and opened doors and let fear do the work. Could Elena be alive? Could she have walked into that water not to drown but to escape, the way Hope had walked out of an unlocked door at Greenfield? Could Gabriel have been standing on those rocks not as a murderer watching his victim die, but as a predator watching his prey flee, watching her disappear into the water and swimming, in the dark, toward a boat or a shore or a plan that she had been building in secret for weeks, hidden behind deleted messages and locked doors, and a smile that said, "I'm fine, I'm just tired." Julian didn't know. The evidence didn't support it, not yet. But the pattern did. Gabriel's pattern wasn't death. It was disappearance. Women didn't die in his orbit. They vanished. They were erased from records, from families, from the visible world. They became ghosts, and ghosts by definition are people who haven't been confirmed dead. Julian walked back inside. He climbed the stairs. He stopped outside Caleb's room. The boy was asleep. Hope was in the chair beside the bed, also asleep. Truly asleep, not the shallow, vigilant half-sleep of a woman on the run, but the deep, surrendered unconsciousness of a body that had finally, after 4 years, found a place where it felt safe enough to shut down completely. Her head was tilted against the chair's wing. Her rough hands were folded in her lap. The scar above her eyebrow caught the nightlight's glow. Caleb's blue blanket had slipped off the bed. One end trailed on the floor. The other end was clutched in Hope's hand, not because she'd taken it, but because Caleb had placed it there before falling asleep, sharing the blanket Elena had knitted, the last physical piece of his mother, given freely to the woman who had become, in the space of 48 hours, the person he trusted most in the world. Julian stood in the doorway and watched them sleep. 2 broken people, held together by a blue blanket and a trust that defied every rational explanation. He thought about Elena. He thought about Grace whispering into a phone in a locked bathroom. He thought about Priscilla, whose evidence had survived 6 years in a storage unit, waiting. He thought about Gabriel, smiling at cameras, smiling at congregations, smiling at the world while the women in his life disappeared one by one into systems he had built to swallow them. And he thought about Caleb's words in the kitchen, the words that had broken everything open. He was at the beach. The day Mummy went in the water, he was standing on the rocks, watching, not acting, watching. Because Gabriel Okoro never acted directly. He built the conditions. He created the pressure. He opened the door. And then he watched. Which meant Elena hadn't been pushed. She had been driven. Driven to the water by a fear so overwhelming that the ocean looked safer than the shore. And if she had been driven rather than pushed, then the ocean wasn't necessarily a grave. It might have been an exit. Julian pulled out his phone. He typed a message to Renata. New priority. I need you to investigate the possibility that Elena Ashworth survived the drowning at Pinecrest. No body was ever recovered. Gabriel's pattern isn't murder, it's disappearance. If Elena is alive, she's hiding, the same way Hope hid, the same way Priscilla tried to. Find her. He pressed send. He put the phone away. He looked at his son one more time, sleeping, peaceful. The blue blanket stretched between his small hand and Hope's scarred one. Then Julian Ashworth went to his study, sat in the leather chair, and waited for morning. Not the way he'd waited for 14 months, in grief, in guilt, in the numb paralysis of a man who believed the worst had already happened. He waited the way a man waits when he has finally, after the longest and darkest night of his life, seen the first pale edge of light on the horizon. Not dawn yet, but the promise of it, the direction. And in a 5-bedroom house in a gated community in Trenton, New Jersey, a 9-year-old girl named Grace lay awake in her bed, her hand resting on the bottom drawer of her desk. The drawer with 1,461 drawings of a woman with short hair and a scar above her eye. She had heard her mother's voice tonight, for the first time in 4 years, and her mother had said, "I'm coming for you." Grace believed her, not because she was naive, not because she was a child and children believe things, because she had spent 4 years inside a machine built to make her forget her mother, and the machine had failed. Every tool Gabriel had used, the isolation, the narrative, the erasure of photographs and documents and evidence of Hope's existence, had failed against the one thing he couldn't control: memory. The bone-deep, cellular, ineradicable memory of what it feels like to be loved by someone who holds you without checking your uniform first. Grace closed her eyes. She pressed her hand flat against the drawer, and she whispered, for the last time, the 2 words she had been saying every night for 1,461 nights. But tonight, the words were different. Tonight, they weren't a plea, they were an answer. She's coming. And 3 states away, in a Connecticut mansion surrounded by guards and lawyers and the accumulated evidence of a monster's 20-year reign, a woman who had been invisible for 4 years slept in a chair beside a child who wasn't hers, holding a blue blanket knitted by a woman who might still be alive, dreaming, for the first time since she could remember, not of running, but of standing still. The war was just beginning. But for the first time in longer than any of them could measure, the right people were fighting it. And Gabriel Okoro, sitting in his study in Trenton with his Bible open and his phone dark and the silence of a house built on control pressing in around him, felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Doubt passed quickly. He was, after all, a man who had never lost. A man who owned courtrooms before trials began. A man who smiled at cameras because the cameras always smiled back. But doubt, once it enters, never fully leaves. It lives in the walls, it waits, and it grows, the way truth does, the way justice does, the way a mother's love does, quietly, persistently, in a bottom drawer, in the dark, one drawing at a time, until the drawer can no longer hold it and the whole house shakes.